Chapter 1737. The space in all directions was completely cut off, and an icy chill intertwined, as if it wanted to freeze and annihilate everything. That kind of aura was extremely terrifying. An expert at the peak of the true god realm, this aura is simply... White Tiger couldn't help but tremble. Previously, they had encountered an early-stage true god realm cultivator from the world of souls, but that person couldn't be compared to this expert at the peak of the true god realm. The difference between the two was too great, like the difference between heaven and earth. The strongest is only at the mid-stage of the immortal king realm. How dare you barge into King Yi's city? How stupid! You're courting death. Within King Yi's city, many cultivators from the world of souls looked at Lin Tiany's group with cold, mocking gazes. In the void, the pinnacle true god expert in blood-red robes was King Yi's city lord. The colding energy around his body was oppressive. Looking at Lin Tian, Bai Ziki, and the others, he didn't make any extra movements. His energy turned into a sky-covering sea god wave that pressed down on the group. Behind him, the other 17 people didn't move. Their expressions were cold, and their gazes fell on Lin Tian's group as if they were looking at corpses. In these people's eyes, Lin Tiany's group had barged into King Yi's city and attracted the strongest city lord's attention. There was no way they could survive. Rubble. As the city lord of King Yi's energy waves pressed down, the large space distorted. The aura was vast, cold, and terrifying. Lin Tian was at the front of the group, facing the energy waves. He could clearly feel the enormous pressure, but his expression didn't change at all. His gaze swept across the city lord of King Yi and the other 17 cultivators behind him. His gaze fell on the city lord of King Yi again, and the corners of his mouth curled up. The 18 of you are the strongest forces in King Yi's city. Appearing together like this saves me a lot of trouble. I can suppress all of you at once. As his words fell, 20 mystic aqua jade platforms appeared in a row. Each jade platform was covered with dense formation runes, and in an instant, they exploded together. The dense formation runes directly interweaved into the void, sealing off all directions. Boom! The space in all directions shook violently, and the world became dark in an instant. A murderous aura spread out, shattering a piece of the void at the first moment, and black vortexes were born one after another. Immediately after, rays of light shot up from this place, creating a clanging sound like that of swords. Every ray of light contained extremely terrifying murderous intent, as if they wanted to shatter this entire universe. Moreover, at the same time, a terrifying sealing force surged, as if it wanted to seal everything in this world. With a sizzling sound, the divine wave of power that City Master he had unleashed was instantly shattered by this killing light. For a moment, the expressions of everyone in King Yi's city changed. This is formation pattern, killing array, and a sealing power. Everyone in King Yi's city paled. The expression of the city lord and the 17 people behind him changed as well. At this moment, they were all trapped by the dense formation patterns. Boundless killing intent interweaved, and a terrifying sealing force surged, causing them to tremble slightly. So, you came prepared. City Master Yi's expression turned cold, and the evil power outside his body surged. However, you think you can act so presumptuously here with just a few formations? Don't think too highly of yourself, human. Boom! As his words fell, the evil power that he emitted skyrocketed, instantly reaching an extremely frightening height. Moreover, the aura of divine might also appeared at the same time. Divine Tao laws were directly used, and the divine might of a peak true god was undoubtedly displayed. This aura was very frightening, causing the whooshing crocodile, the white tiger, and the others to involuntarily tremble. Even Bai Ziki and Yang Qi could not help but frown. Lin Tian could naturally feel the terror of this aura, but his expression did not change in the slightest. I just feel that these formations are enough for us to act presumptuously here, he said calmly. His expression was calm. As soon as he finished speaking, he activated the divine One Soul mantra. His soul power intertwined, causing the 10 sealing formations and the 10 horns universe suppressing Yuan killing formation to tremble in unison. The sealing and killing power they exuded immediately skyrocketed. City Master Yi's expression changed again. As the sealing power in this place surged, the divine might he emitted fluctuated and was forcefully suppressed. It was dozens of times weaker than usual. At the same time, as the sealing power exploded, the killing power also surged, causing the spirit in his sea of consciousness to tremble slightly. At the same time, the expressions of the 17 people behind him changed, and they all felt a great threat. You! Looking at Lin Tian, this peak true God City Master Yi's expression changed, becoming even colder. At the same time, it became extremely ugly. Lin Tianin smiled coldly and did not say anything. With a thought, the 10 complete Thousand Seals formation suppressed the surrounding space, weakening City Master Yi and the other 17 people's abilities and greatly reducing their combat power. Then, the 10 Horns universe suppressing Yuan killing formation surged, and an unparalleled killing light attacked the 18 people at the same time. The City Lord of Royal East City gritted his teeth with a cold expression. The divine might of a peak true God surged. Even though it was greatly weakened by the 1,000 Forbid Ants, 10,000 Seals formation, its might was still intimidating. It faced the killing light of the universe, suppressing Yuan killing formation. In the blink of an eye, the two forces collided. Boom! With a loud bang, the destructive power was vast and mighty, and the surrounding space was completely shattered. With a bang, City Master Yi was sent flying, cutting a sorry figure. Obviously, after being weakened by the 10 complete 1,000 Prohibition 10,000 Seals Great Array, even though he was a peak true God expert, it would be difficult for him to withstand the killing light of the 10 Corners universe suppressing Origin killing formation. City Master. All the cultivators in King Yi's city paled in fright. Their city lord had peaked true God level cultivation. But at this time, he was actually directly sent flying by the impact. Even Bai Ziki and the others were moved, feeling shocked by this scene. When that killing formation and sealing formation are combined, it's truly terrifying. The white tiger stared. Boom! The killing light boomed, and the sealing power surged, causing the surrounding space to tremble. Lin Tian's expression did not change. With a wave of his hand, he sent another wave of killing light at City Master Yi. King Yi's city lord roared as he used a grand divine ability to resist. However, under the combined power of the 1,000 Seals Grand Formation and the universe suppressing Yuan killing formation, the grand divine ability he used was immediately shattered. He was sent flying again. At the same time, if even a peak true God like him was in such a state, the other 17 people were even more wretched, all of them bleeding. Arcs! With a scream, a half-step true God was obliterated by the killing light. Then his divine soul was also pulverized, his body and soul extinguished. No! City Master, save! Arg! Arg! Screams rang out once more. In the blink of an eye, another 3 half-step true gods had their bodies and divine souls obliterated, unable to resist this terrifying killing light. Chapter 1738. Blood splattered in the air. 4 half-step true divinities had been killed in a row, shocking everyone in the city. How could this be? Within King Yi's city, the cultivators of the world of dead souls couldn't help but tremble. The 4 half-step true gods disappeared in just a blink of an eye. Even the city lord of Royal Yi's capital was moved, and his expression turned ugly. What do you think? Relying on these formations, you can do whatever you want in King Yi's city, right? Lin Tian said, looking at the city lord. Human. The city lord's expression turned even more unsightly and cold. Lin Tian smiled faintly and didn't make any big movements. He just stood there quietly, using the Celestial One Soul incantation to support the 1,000 Forbid Ants, 10,000 Seals Grand Formation, and the 10 Horns Cosmos suppressing Origin killing formation. Unparalleled sealing power and killing power surged, as if to suppress everything in the world. Ah! A miserable scream rang out as another half-step true god was chopped to pieces, unable to resist this power. Even the other 5 early true god realm and middle true god realm experts of the world of souls were frightened at this moment. Staying in such a deadly formation and forbidden formation, they had to use their divine techniques to resist the murderous light. They were in a perilous situation. This killing power is simply... The white tiger couldn't help but gulp. Even the calm by Ziki and Yang Chi's eyes flickered. Boom! The void rumbled. Unparalleled killing lights surged and covered the world, attacking everyone in this area. Every single killing light was powerful and terrifying. Every single killing light was extremely sharp. Ah! Another scream rang out as another half-step true god was smashed to pieces by the killing light of the cosmos suppressing origin killing formation. His soul and body were destroyed as well, and he died in body and soul. At the same time, Lin Tian moved, using the Celestial One Soul incantation. Soul power intertwined around his body as he used this divine art to control the 1,000 forbid ants, 10,000 seals grand formation, and the cosmos suppressing origin killing formation. Killing light filled the sky as he appeared in front of an early true god from the world of souls. The expert's heart trembled, and he quickly retreated. The killing light around Lin Tian's body was too terrifying, and so was the sealing power. However, he was too slow. Lin Tian stepped forward and pressed down with his right hand. The killing light filled the sky, and the sealing power fell on the man, instantly drowning him. Splat! Blood splattered everywhere as the man's body exploded. Only his soul barely survived. Shocked, terrified, and angry, he quickly retreated. However, in the next moment, a dense mass of killing light and sealing power fell together, landing on this person's divine soul. No! A miserable shriek reverberated. This person's divine soul was immediately covered in cracks, and then it shattered with a sizzling sound. How could this be? This scene caused the cultivators in King E City to tremble once again. How long had it been? One of their true, god-level experts had been killed, just like that. Human. Inside the killing formation, the city lord of King E City roared, shaking off the killing light. The evil killing power that filled the sky pressed down on Lin Tian. Lin Tian was fearless. Without any complicated movements, he directly punched out. This punch appeared extremely simple, but in reality, it was not so. As the punch was thrown, the surrounding dense killing light and sealing power surged like a vast ocean, directly shattering the evil killing power that this person had unleashed. After which, it steadily landed on the person's chest, and with a bang, it sent him flying dozens of feet away. Then he stepped forward, controlling the killing power in the sky, to press forward again. In fact, at this time, he could have left with by Ziki's group while the 10,000 seals great arrays and the 10 horns universe suppressing Yuan killing formation were suppressing the city lord of King East City and the others. He could have used the world teleportation array in the center of the capital to leave the world of souls and return to the celestial region. However, he didn't do so. Firstly, he wanted to test the might of the 10 complete 1,000 seals grand formations and the 10 horns universe, suppressing Yuan killing formation when they were combined. Secondly, since the other party wanted to kill them as soon as possible, he naturally didn't need to show them any mercy. Since he had already suppressed more than 10 people with the killing formation and restriction formation, he would kill all of them. Boom! Rolling killing light interweaved in this space. The 10 complete 10,000 seals great arrays and the 10 horns universe, suppressing Yuan killing formation worked together. The sealing power and killing power coexisted, suppressing all directions. The killing power was terrifying. Ah! With an ear-piercing scream, another half-step true god was directly chopped into pieces, his body and soul destroyed. At the same time, Lin Tian appeared in front of the city lord of King East City, who had been sent flying. The endless sealing power and killing power pressed down together like the Milky Way. Poof! This combination of power was somewhat terrifying. Even the city lord of King East City, who was a peak true god, could not withstand it at all. He was directly crushed into pieces by the killing power and sealing power. City Lord. Many cultivators in King Yi City could not help but cry out in shock. Their city lord had a peak true god cultivation base. But at this time, his physical body was actually shattered like this. Even Whooshing Crocodile and the others could not help but be shocked. It's really terrifying. Whooshing Crocodile stared. Peak true god experts were very powerful. But now, they were completely unable to withstand the combination of the sealing power and killing power in this place. Yeah, little Taichu called out in a childish voice, waving its little paws at Lin Tian, as if cheering for Lin Tian and cheering for him. In the killing array, the city lord of King Yi City's body shattered. His divine soul retreated and quickly began to reform his body. I won't give you a chance. Lin Tiandao. He was very fast. In an instant, he had arrived in front of the city lord. He used the Divine One Soul art to mobilize the sealing power and killing power in all directions. With this killing power and sealing power, he used the Primal Chaos Emperor Fist to form the killing and sealing true Dragon Divine Soul. Poof! The city lord of King Yi City's newly reformed body was shattered again. Blood splattered everywhere, and even his divine soul was injured. Damn it! The city lord roared. His divine soul retreated again, and he began to reform his body again. Lin Tiandao snorted. Lightning flashed on the surface of his body, and he activated the 5 lightning divine territory. Bolts of purple divine lightning fell from the sky, forming a sea of lightning that surrounded him and the city lord of King Yi City. Then he stepped forward. As if he had teleported, he changed his figure within this domain-type divine technique. He appeared beside the city lord of King Yi again. Then, he unleashed another Primal Chaos Emperor Fist that was filled with killing power and sealing power. Poof! Once again, the city lord of King Yi City exploded. His expression became even more shocked and furious. At the same time, he was filled with fear. His divine soul released a dazzling divine light, and he quickly repaired his body. At the same time, he activated his soul power divine ability. His soul power interweaved into celestial and bird-like figures that pressed down on Lin Tiandao. Lin Tiandao raised his hand. His hand was filled with killing power and sealing power. He directly slapped all the celestial and bird-like figures into pieces. Then, using the domain-type divine ability of the 5 lightning divine territory, he appeared in front of the city lord of King Yi City in the next instant and slapped down again. Crack! The killing power and sealing power in the sky combined and landed on the city lord of King Yi City's divine soul. Cracks appeared on his divine soul. The city lord of King Yi City groaned and quickly retreated. His divine soul shone as he used a special technique to repair his divine soul. Don't waste your energy. I'll finish you off with the next attack. Lin Tiandao. His voice was calm. He activated the Heavenly One Soul technique to the maximum, mobilizing 80% of the sealing and killing power of the 20 formations. Then, he stepped forward. Using the domain-type divine ability of the 5 lightning divine territory, he instantly appeared in front of the city lord of King Yi City. He mobilized 80% of the sealing and killing power to press down on the city lord of King Yi City, directly enveloping the entire space. Break for me! The city lord of King Yi City felt the threat of death. He roared angrily, using his divine soul to display his strongest battle power. However, it was useless. The powerful divine power that he released with his divine soul was instantly crushed into pieces. It was also at this time that Lin Tiandao mobilized 80% of the sealing and killing power to completely land on the city lord of King Yi City. No! With a furious roar, the city lord of King Yi City's divine soul immediately exploded. His body and soul were destroyed. For a moment, the expressions of all the cultivators of the world of dead souls in King Yi City changed drastically. They couldn't help but tremble. City lord, how could this be? How is this possible? The faces of the cultivators of the world of dead souls turned pale. Their city lord, a peak true god powerhouse, the strongest person in King Yi City, was now dead. Within the killing formation, the other powerhouses were also stunned. A peak true god was killed just like that? So powerful. The whooshing crocodile and the white tiger couldn't help but widen their eyes. Yeah, the little Taichu called out in its childish voice again, waving its little paws at Lin Tianyi. Boom! Within the killing formation, the sealing and killing power continued to sweep through, shaking the entire space. Lin Tian was in the middle of it, his expression calm. In reality, the process of him killing the city lord of King Yi City might have seemed fast, but it wasn't simple at all. He had used all his strength to activate the 10,000 Seals formation and the 10 Horns universe suppressing Yuan killing formation at the same time, and then mobilized 80% of the power of the 20 formations to attack. This step was very taxing. At this moment, his gaze fell on the other people in the killing formation, and he directly stepped forward to suppress them. Poof! He appeared in front of an early-stage true god powerhouse and slapped down. The killing power and sealing power in the sky intertwined and crashed down on the other party. With a poof, the early-stage true god powerhouse exploded. His divine soul quickly retreated with a look of fear. Lin Tian looked at the other party and took a step forward. The killing power and sealing power in the sky moved with him, turning into a killing and sealing sea. It directly covered the other party's divine soul and mercilessly crushed it. Ah! Chapter 1739. The blood of the real body experts floated in the air, causing the faces of all the world of dead souls cultivators in King Yi City to turn pale. This is unbelievable. Ling Yun's eyes widened. Not long after, Lin Tian had killed the city master of King Yi City, who was at the peak of the true god level. Then he had killed another true god. Think about it. Even a peak true god city master was killed so quickly. That's not really a big deal. And Shui said. Ling Yun nodded. That's true. Boom! In front of him, divine power surged, and killing intent surged. The 10 complete 1,000 forbid ants, 10,000 seals formation, combined with the Qinquan suppressing Yuan killing formation. The sealing power and the killing power intertwined, causing black vortexes to appear in the surrounding void. The space was annihilated inch by inch. Lin Tian was in the middle of it all, like a killing god. His expression was calm as he took a step forward and casually slapped down with his palm. Blood splattered everywhere. The last few half-step true god experts did not even have the time to groan before they were annihilated by the sealing force and killing force. All of them died in body and soul. However, this was not a big deal because it was not difficult for him to kill a half-step true god with his own strength. Now, with the cooperation of such a killing formation and sealing formation, it was naturally much easier to kill such a person without any difficulty. In an instant, there were only 3 early-stage true gods and 2 mid-stage true gods from the world of dead souls left. The 5 of them stood together, resisting the killing and sealing forces while looking at Lin Tian cautiously. Their eyes were filled with fear. Lin Tian faced the 5 of them without any hesitation. Together with the 5 Thunder Sacred Realm, he instantly stepped in front of them. Boom! As soon as he stepped into this place, he activated the Heavenly One Soul mantra. The sealing and killing powers in all directions surged and crashed down on the 5 of them. It was unknown how many times stronger than the sealing powers of a normal killing light. The 5 of them couldn't help but tremble. All of them let out low roars as they utilized divine Tao laws and formidable divine techniques to resist Chun, Shi with all their might. Rumble! 5 types of divine Tao laws and powerful divine arts collided with the surging sealing energy and killing energy. Both sides collided with each other, and strands of lightning and lightning shook this place. Shwa! With the sound of breaking through space, Lin Tian used the 5 lightning god domain to teleport. He appeared in front of one of the early true god experts and punched out mercilessly with his primal chaos emperor fist. This early-stage true deity expert felt a chill run down his spine. After using a divine technique, he quickly moved away, pulling apart the distance between him and Lin Tian. However, Lin Tian had unleashed the 5 lightning divine domain. Within the space enveloped by the 5 lightning divine domain, he could move to any position with lightning in the blink of an eye. The early true god expert's retreat was completely meaningless. Lin Tian appeared behind him in the next instant. The man's expression changed. "You boom." Lin Tian raised his hand and pressed down. The boundless sealing energy and killing energy that he mobilized directly enveloped the man. At the same time, a divine transformation talisman combined with the sealing energy and killing energy that filled the sky fell on the man's body. Ah! Blood splattered and an ear-piercing scream rang out. This early true god expert was directly smashed into pieces. His divine soul was also obliterated into ashes by the divine transformation talisman and the divine transformation talisman. For a moment, there were only 4 world of death experts left within the range of the 1,000 restriction and 10,000 seals formation and the universe suppressing Yuan killing formation. 2 of them were mid-stage true gods, while the other 2 were early-stage true gods. The 4 of them looked extremely unsightly. They tried to retreat from the killing formation, but it was completely useless. "Don't struggle. None of you will survive." Lin Tian's voice was very calm. Moreover, at this time, he exerted his full strength once again. He activated the 10,000 restriction and 10,000 seals formation and the universe suppressing Yuan killing formation to the limit at the same time, cooperating with the 5 lightning divine domain to launch the fiercest attack. Boom! 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 Thunder rolled, ear-piercing and soul-stirring, shattering pieces of space one after another. Ah! There was a blood-curdling scream. Another early-stage true god expert was smashed into pieces by Lin Tian. His divine soul was obliterated in the blink of an eye. "There are 3 more." Lin Tian's voice was calm. He shuttled back and forth, surrounded by the power of thunder, the power of sealing, and the power of slaughter. He was invincible. In the next 100 breaths, he killed the last 3 true god-level cultivators from the world of souls in this place one after another. Immediately, the space became much quieter. In the capital, all the cultivators from the world of death turned pale. How could this be? Everyone began to tremble as they staggered backwards. 10 half-step true gods, 5 early-stage true gods, 2 mid-stage true gods, and 1 peak true god. They were the core battle force of King Yi's capital. Now, they were all killed so easily by a young celestial king. "Boy, you're terrifying." Whooshing Crocodile flashed over and said. Then, Bai Ziki, Yang Qi, and the others appeared beside him. Lin Tianyi smiled and said, "Let's go." Killing marks surrounded the space. He glanced at the other cultivators from the world of death in King Yi's capital. Then, he called Bai Ziki and the others to go with him to the pagoda in the center of the capital. At this time, all the cultivators above the half-step true god level in King Yi's capital were dead. No one in the entire capital could threaten them. They didn't need to worry about anything as they walked. The cultivators from the world of death in King Yi's capital looked at them, their faces pale. They watched the group of people walk toward the pagoda in the center of the capital, but no one dared to move. After all, Lin Tian had just killed 18 cultivators, including the city lord, who was a peak true god. It was truly terrifying. Even though these people had seen Lin Tian do it with their own eyes, they still felt a bone-deep fear for Lin Tian. Lin Tian ignored them. He walked with Ling Yun and the others into the pagoda in the center of the capital. They came to a huge teleportation formation at the top of the pagoda. At a glance, dense formation runes were intertwined. It looked very complicated and gave off a faint glow. Can this teleportation formation really lead from here to the immortal region and to other great realms? White Tiger looked at the formation. Yes, as long as you have the coordinates. Lin Tiandao. He cultivated the Tianyi Soul mantra and was very good at formations. He could tell at a glance that this teleportation formation was extraordinary. Let's go. He knew the coordinates of the immortal region very well. At this time, he called Bai Ziki and the others to enter the teleportation formation. He channeled his soul power into the formation, and it immediately activated. After a flash of light, the group was swallowed up, and they disappeared. Darkness covered their vision, and they were pulled into the void. After some time, they were shaken out of the dark void by a huge force. They stepped on solid ground again, and their vision became bright again. Looking around, they saw immortal mountains all around them. White clouds lingered in the sky, and dense immortal spiritual energy intertwined. The immortal region. We're back. Chapter 1740. Every great world had a specific aura. Generally speaking, when a cultivator stayed in a great world for a long time, they would be able to sense it. At this time, the group instantly knew that they were now in the celestial realm. Of course, Lin Tian had used the celestial realm's coordinates to cross to this place through the world teleportation array, so there was no mistake. We've finally left the world of souls, Whooshing Crocodile said. That world was full of enemies. It was really not a good thing. Of course, they did not suffer in that world. Instead, their strength improved greatly, and they obtained many treasures. It could be considered a good trip. Around them, there were mountains and open terrain. They were not where they were in the celestial realm at the beginning, but somewhere else. Naturally, the group did not care about this. Lin Tian looked around and followed a direction. He called by Ziki and the others to go to the mortal world of the celestial realm. Although the celestial realm was a vast world of cultivation, in the end, the number of mortals still far exceeded the number of cultivators. Of course, this was the same in any major world. No matter which major world it was, the number of mortals was the greatest, because no matter which major world it was, there would always be space for mortals to live. About a few hours later, he and Ziki came to a place in the mortal world. He took out a spatial container. It was the container that the cultivators of the world of souls used to suppress many ordinary mortals in the celestial realm. He released all the ordinary people in it. This is not where you lived before, but it is suitable for you to live here. He opened his mouth and said to these ordinary people, you can choose to settle down here. Of course, you can also choose to go elsewhere. It was safe to put these people here. There were no cultivators in this area. They were all ordinary people. There were more than 10,000 ordinary people released from the spatial container. They were collected from different places by the cultivators of the world of souls. All of them bowed to Lin Tian with excitement on their faces. Lin Tian had saved them. They were still alive. Lin Tian waved his hand and said a few words to these people. Then, he called by Ziki and the others to leave. Thank you, immortal. The tens of thousands of ordinary people all bowed and kowtowed. In the eyes of these ordinary people, those who could fly were undoubtedly the legendary immortals. Lin Tianyi and the others quickly left that place and traveled for hundreds of thousands of miles. Let's go back, Lin Tian said. Let's go back. Whooshing Crocodile nodded and said, come to think of it, it's been a long time since we left. Of course, it knew that Lin Tian was referring to returning to the 10 Directions celestial domain. Bai Ziki, Ling Yun, and the others nodded in agreement. Sister Wu Yi is from the same world as you, right? And Shui asked with bright eyes. Lin Tian nodded. Then, I will go back with you. And Shui said hurriedly. He admired Wu Yi very much and wanted to see Wu Yi again. All right. Lin Tian naturally had no objections. Immediately, he tore open the portal with his powerful Immortal King cultivation base and led the group into it. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared on the spot. Their field of vision instantly turned dark. The next moment, they stepped out of the void and appeared in the vast starry sky. Looking around, they saw huge stars dotted all around them. They were intertwined with different colors and looked very beautiful. These are the stars in the starry sky. They are so beautiful. And Shui's eyes lit up. She was born in the celestial domain and had always cultivated there. She had never come to the lower realm, so this was the first time she saw a star up close. Lin Tian smiled faintly and moved again. He pulled open the starry passage, and the group of people stepped into it, enveloped in golden divine light. In the next moment, they appeared before a colorful planet. We're here. A faint light flashed across his eyes. The multicolored starlight was hazy. It was incomparably huge and had a standard circular shape. It had a very familiar fluctuation. Is Big Sister in here? Ziyu's eyes lit up, and she was a little excited. Yes, Lin Tian nodded. Judging from all the traces, Ziyu and Ziyu were sisters. Immediately, he led the group into the 10 Directions ancient star. In the next moment, they appeared in the 10th heaven, then left the 10th heaven and appeared in the 9th heaven. In the 9th heaven, there were many mountains. They were all extraordinary, but compared to the big mountains in the celestial domain, the difference was too big. In other words, the two couldn't be compared at all. I'll take Ziyu to find little Z first, then return to the immortal court. What about you guys? He asked by Ziki and the others. Let's go home. By Ziki's words were simple. He had left his family for hundreds of years. Now that he returned to the 10 Directions heaven, he naturally had to go back to his family as soon as possible. I'm going to find Master, Ling Yun said. Speaking of which, that old man shouldn't be as powerful as me now. His master was the 1000/Sword Emperor. His cultivation base was at the Emperor realm. Now that so many years have passed, he had reached the celestial immortal realm. He felt that he must have surpassed his master. I'll go with you. And Shui said to Lin Tiandao. She had already heard that the elder sister Zi Yu was looking for, the Violet Fairy, was a good friend of Wu Yi. She lived in the same place as Wu Yi. Lin Tian took Ziyu to find the Violet Fairy. Naturally, he would go to Wu Yi's place. Master Tiger will go with you. I'm not familiar with this world. White Tiger said. Wuxing Crocodile and Little Taichu naturally followed Lin Tianyi. Little Taichu also wanted to see Wu Yi. Zi didn't say anything, but she was the most excited one in the group. Okay, I'll see you in the immortal court later, Lin Tian said to Bai Ziki and Ling Yun. Immediately, the group separated. Bai Ziki went back to the Bai family. Ling Yun went to find his master, the 1000/Sword Emperor, and he took Ziyu and Shui, Wuxing Crocodile, Little Taichu, and White Tiger to Misty Mountain. Misty Mountain was located in the eastern region of the 9th heaven. His speed was very fast. It didn't take long for him to arrive at the periphery of Misty Mountain with Ziyu and Shui, Wuxing Crocodile, Little Taichu, and White Tiger. Looking around, there were mountains in front of them, like ancient dragons, mixed with an extraordinary aura. Here, White Tiger was a little moved. Compared to the many immortal mountains in the immortal domain, the mountains here didn't look tall at all. They could even be said to be very short and small. But at this time, looking at these mountains here, it gave him an inexplicable feeling of trembling in his heart. It seems very scary, and Shui also widened her eyes. Obviously, this place was surrounded by spiritual energy and the air was fresh, but she still felt a little scared. Lin Tian was very calm. Wu Yi lived in this place all year round. With that kind of strength, even if this place is a wasteland, it will gradually be changed by Wu Yi's aura, slowly becoming terrifying. Moreover, this kind of horror can't be felt by people with low cultivation bases. On the contrary, the higher the cultivation base, the more terrifying it will be. Let's go. He called a group of people and entered Misty Mountain using a special method. Soon after, they arrived at the center of Misty Mountain. In the center of Misty Mountain, the most majestic immortal peak stood alone, surrounded by clouds and mist, interweaving with immortal brilliance. This is the central peak of Misty Mountain, the Misty Peak. Elder Brother Lin Tian, come up quickly. A voice sounded on the peak. A girl in red stood on the peak, waving happily at Lin Tian. It was AI. Lin Tian stood at the bottom of Misty Peak and looked up. Every time he came to this place, he would always be discovered at the first moment. He smiled faintly and led Ziyu and Shui and the others into the sky. In the blink of an eye, they reached the peak of Misty Peak. Little AI, he smiled and said. He simply introduced AI and Shui, White Tiger, and Ziyu to each other. As for Wuxing Crocodile and Little Taichu, AI already knew them, so there was no need to introduce them. AI greeted in Shui, White Tiger, and Ziyu politely. Then she looked at Lin Tiandao and said, Master knows that elder brother Lin Tian is here. He is waiting for you in the small courtyard in front. Let's go over." "Okay." Lin Tian smiled. Then, he and little AI walked towards the center of Misty Peak. Soon, the faint fragrance of tea floated in the air. A simple courtyard appeared in front of them. It was surrounded by a fence, which had an ancient feel to it. There was a small wooden table in the courtyard. Wu Yi, who was wearing a white dress, was making tea. She naturally sensed that Lin Tianyi and the others were here. She looked up and nodded gently at Lin Tian. She didn't like to talk much, but Lin Tian naturally understood the meaning of her gesture. She was inviting him in. Little Taichu shook its wings and flew over. It landed on Wu Yi's shoulder and rubbed Wu Yi's cheek intimately. Other than Lin Tian, the little guy liked Wu Yi the most. Wu Yi smiled and rubbed the little guy's head. "Elder sister Wu Yi, it's me. Do you still remember me? I'm in Shui." And Shui was the second to jump over. It was both happy and excited. Wu Yi nodded at Shui. It was obvious that she still remembered Shui. She said softly, "Welcome." "Yes, yes." And Shui became even happier and more excited. Next to Lin Tian, the white tiger looked at Wu Yi with its eyes wide open. It was hard to imagine that there was such a beautiful woman in the world. Then, in the next moment, he flashed over and stood up like a human. He looked at Wu Yi seriously and said, "Beautiful." Bang! A golden palm print fell. Lin Tian made a move and slapped it tens of thousands of feet away. "Ow! Boiling you?" The white tiger's wail came from afar. Whooshing Crocodile looked at the white tiger and couldn't help but shake its head and sigh. "You brought this upon yourself." Lin Tian stepped into the courtyard and came to the small wooden table. He smiled at Wu Yi and said, "The tea smells good." Wu Yi didn't say anything. She just nodded lightly. Chapter 1741. "This is?" Looking at Ziyu, Wu Yi asked softly. Lin Tian was slightly moved. This was the first time he had seen Wu Yi take the initiative to ask a stranger she had met for the first time. Then, a wisp of light flashed in his eyes. Wu Yi must have seen something, otherwise, she wouldn't have spoken like this. "Her name is Ziyu, a fae from the immortal region," he said. Wu Yi didn't say anything, but a glimmer of light flashed in her eyes again. "Sit," she said to Ziyu. Lin Tian was even more certain that Wu Yi must have seen something. After a pause, he opened his mouth again and said to Wu Yi, "She's a fae from the immortal region. She said she's Little Purple's sister." Wu Yi nodded. She wasn't surprised and didn't say anything. She poured the brewed tea for Lin Tian and the others. "Beautiful sister, where's big sister?" Zi was very excited. The light in her eyes was very strong. She looked around and then looked at Wu Yi and asked. At this time, on this ethereal peak, she felt an extremely strong bloodline aura similar to hers. "She's in seclusion. She'll come out in about 7 days." Wu Yi said softly. Lin Tian looked at the deepest part of ethereal peak. He knew that there were several extraordinary places in that place. When Wu Yi and the Violet Fairy were in seclusion, they were there. "Then let's wait for another 7 days," he said to Ziyu with a smile. Ziyu nodded. "Okay." At this time, she was very excited and wanted to see the Violet Fairy immediately. She wanted to see her sister, who she had never seen before. However, after knowing that the Violet Fairy was in seclusion, she forced herself to suppress the urge to see the Violet Fairy immediately. She appeared very obedient. Lin Tianyi smiled, picked up the teacup in front of him, and drank it in one gulp. It wasn't that he was very bold, but that the teacup was too small. Wu Yi picked up the teapot and filled it for him. When Lin Tian saw her holding the teapot, he couldn't help but recall the scene when she was forcefully dragged into Extreme Hall because of her own origin. At that time, when she appeared, she was holding a teapot and asking him if he wanted to drink some tea. Thinking about it, that scene was too natural, and Shui sat at the side, his eyes shining. He stared at Wu Yi without blinking, as if he wanted to swallow Wu Yi whole. Purple Moon, on the other hand, kept her eyes fixed on the depths of Misty Peak. She already knew that the Violet Fairy was in seclusion there. The group stayed at this place. After Wu Yi finished making tea, she led the group around the Misty Peak. Of course, it was mainly to show Ziyue and Shui around. Around the Misty Peak, there were all kinds of trees and immortal plants, all of which were surrounded by extraordinary radiance. Wisps of exotic fragrance intertwined, and some spiritual lights even automatically transformed into spirit butterflies that fluttered around the Misty Peak. It looked like the world of gods. What a beautiful environment! And Shui's eyes lit up, not to mention her, who was here for the first time. Even Lin Tian, who had been here many times, would occasionally look at the scenery around the Misty Peak with sparkling eyes. This place was really too extraordinary. The group walked around the Misty Peak, simply walking through every corner of the Misty Peak. Time flew, and 7 days passed in the blink of an eye. Boom! On this day, a powerful fluctuation rushed out from the depths of the Misty Peak, and a faint immortal king aura spread out. Lin Tian looked in that direction, and a faint light flashed in his eyes. Half-step, immortal king. He knew that the Violet Fairy had come out of seclusion and reached the half-step immortal king realm. It was also at this time that the sound of something breaking through the air rang out, and a light flashed. The Violet Fairy flashed out from the depths of the Misty Peak, and faint divine light intertwined around her body. "Little E, I've broken through." From far away, the Violet Fairy shouted in their direction. Then, she saw Lin Tian beside Wu Yi, and was immediately delighted. In the blink of an eye, she came near them, and her speed was very fast. However, in the next moment, before she had time to greet Lin Tian, she saw Ziyu beside Lin Tian, and her expression changed slightly. When Ziyu saw the Violet Fairy appear, her eyes instantly widened. She truly felt the same bloodline aura as her own, and she became unprecedentedly excited and happy. Big sisters. When she saw the Violet Fairy, she immediately pounced over and couldn't help but bring about waves of pure light. In the blink of an eye, she was in front of the Violet Fairy and reached out with both hands to hug her. The Violet Fairy moved to the left and dodged. "I don't know you." Ziyu missed, but she was still very happy. She looked at the Violet Fairy and said, "Oh right, I forgot. Big sister, this is the first time you've seen me." She explained, "I am Ziyu, the Fei Ziyu. My mother is Ling Yueshi, and my father is Zi Huaikong." As she spoke, the light behind her intertwined, and a pair of beautiful wings appeared. She said to the Violet Fairy, "Big sister, look. Ziyu didn't lie to you. Ziyu and Big Sister are both Fei. Our bloodlines are the same." The Violet Fairy looked at the light wings behind Ziyu, and her expression became somewhat ugly. "I'm not your sister, and I'm definitely not a Fei. You got the wrong person." "No." Although Ziyu has never seen Big Sister before, I can clearly feel Big Sister's Fei aura. "You are Big Sister," Ziyu said. "Isn't Big Sister's name Violet Fairy? Mother personally named it." "Ziyu can't be wrong. It's just a coincidence." The Violet Fairy said, "The world is so big. Your sister isn't the only one called Violet Fairy. But you clearly have such a pure Fei aura, and you clearly resonate with Ziyu's origin." How could Ziyu be wrong? How could she be wrong? Ziyu looked at the Violet Fairy and suddenly thought of something. That's right. Father said that because of an accident, Big Sister was swallowed by the chaotic space. Could it be that because of that accident, Big Sister lost her memory? My memory is very good. I haven't lost my memories. I'm not your sister, and I'm definitely not a Fei. You got the wrong person. The Violet Fairy's expression became even uglier. Ziyu looked at the Violet Fairy and took a step towards her. "But, no buts. I'm not of the same race as you, and we don't have the slightest bit of blood relationship," the Violet Fairy said. She turned into a beam of light and flew out of Misty Mountain. "Wu Yi, big brother, I'm going back to Fei King Palace. I have something to do." Her speed was very fast, and in the blink of an eye, she disappeared from the line of sight of the group. For a moment, the atmosphere in this place became a little strange. "You're really not sisters?" Whooshing Crocodile opened his mouth. Lin Tian frowned. Previously, he was very sure that Ziyu and the Violet Fairy were sisters. He even thought that after the two of them met, both sides would be very happy. But he didn't expect that it would turn out like this. However, he didn't deny that the two of them were sisters because of this. This was because the Violet Fairy's reaction was very strange. Big sister. Ziyu looked in the direction where the Violet Fairy left. She was a little stunned, and then she felt a little wronged. Why didn't you recognize Ziyu? You're clearly a Fae, and your bloodline is exactly the same as Ziyu's. Ziyu didn't recognize you wrongly. Chapter 1742. Lin Tian looked at Ziyu's aggrieved expression and felt a little helpless. Wu-Yi, what do you think? He asked Wu-Yi. The Violet Fairy's behavior was clearly a little abnormal. It didn't seem like she had lost her memories. Wu-Yi shook her head and said, she will speak when she wants to. She and Lin Tianyi could also sense that the Violet Fairy was a little abnormal. However, she didn't ask too much because the Violet Fairy didn't look happy. She walked back to the small courtyard and waved at Ziyu. Her voice was very soft. Ziyu, come here. Ziyu was 16 years old now. She was the youngest person here. When she heard Wu Yi's voice, she glanced in the direction where the Violet Fairy had left. Then, she walked over to Wu Yi and sat down at the small wooden table in the courtyard. She then raised her head and looked in the direction where the Violet Fairy had left. And Shui, Wuxing Crocodile, and White Tiger looked at each other. At this time, the atmosphere here wasn't very good. Lin Tian looked in the direction where the Violet Fairy had left and sighed slightly. He said to Wu Yi, I'll go back to the Immortal Court. Will Ziyu stay here with you? Wu Yi sat down beside Ziyu and nodded at Lin Tian. I also want to stay here, and Shui said weakly. He looked at Wu Yi and asked, Can I? Wu Yi nodded. He naturally wouldn't refuse. And Shui immediately became very happy. Ziyu, you can stay here for now. Wu Yi will take care of you, he said to Ziyu. Then he said to Wu Yi, and Shui, and AI. Then he called Little Taichu, Wuxing Crocodile, and White Tiger and left. Goodbye, Yi. See you again. Little Taichu lay on Lin Tian's head and waved its little paws at Wu Yi. Lin Tian blushed with shame when he heard this. The little guy really knew how to talk. He rose into the air above the Misty Peak and soon left the range of the Misty Peak, heading towards the Celestial Court. Like the Misty Peak, the Immortal Court was located in the eastern region of the Ninth Heaven. With his current speed, it didn't take him long to reach the Immortal Court. As far as the eye could see, the Immortal Court was located in the Green Mountain of the 10 Directions. Spiritual energy was dense, and dragon chi surrounded it. Its aura was extraordinary. So this is the Immortal Court that you established in the beginning. It is indeed extraordinary. The White Tiger said, compared to some of the powerful inheritances in the Immortal region, the Immortal Court in front of him might not be very shocking. However, in the starry sky, he was sure that it was definitely at the peak. Yes, Lin Tiandao. With Wuxing Crocodile, Little Taichu, and White Tiger, he stepped out of the Celestial Court with just one step, startling all the immortal soldiers and immortal generals guarding the gate, who quickly bowed to him. Do your own thing, don't worry about me. Lin Tiandao never cared about such superficial etiquette. After that, he took Wuxing Crocodile, White Tiger, and Little Taichu to a large courtyard in the depths of the Celestial Court. In this courtyard, the immortal earth pistol was filled with a delicate fragrance. Brother! A figure rushed over quickly and clung to Lin Tian. It was Lin Shi, who had become more beautiful. At the same time, Jiyu, Shui, Baiqiu, and Sushu also followed. There was a 10 Directions immortal array left by Lin Tian in the Celestial Court, and they were personally controlling it. As soon as Lin Tian entered the Celestial Court, they immediately felt Lin Tian's aura. Lin Tian rubbed Lin Shi's head dotingly, then looked at Jiyu and the other girls and said with a smile, I'm back. Speaking of which, it hadn't been long since he left the 10 Directions heavenly domain because he had returned to the Celestial Court once after coming out of the Wukong domain. Baiqiu giggled and walked over. She circled around Lin Tian and sized him up, then looked surprised. You're already an immortal king. When Lin Tian left, he was only a golden immortal, but now, in just a few years, he had reached the immortal king realm. It had to be said that such a cultivation speed was terrifying. They didn't slack in their cultivation at all in the celestial court. They either had king bodies or great aptitudes, but now they had only reached the early stage heaven immortal realm. Very powerful. Jiyu smiled. In his words, he's definitely stronger than us. Sushu said, that's right. Shui agreed. Several hundred years had already passed. Although they did not spend a lot of time with Lin Tian during this period of time, they were already able to get along with each other in an extremely easygoing manner. They no longer felt shy, embarrassed, or anything like that. Lin Tian couldn't help but smile. Little Sushu is right. Then he introduced the white tiger and the girls to each other. Although the girls couldn't compare to Wu Yi, they were all outstanding beauties, and few people could compare to them. The white tiger couldn't help but stare at them. However, because Wuxing Crocodile had told it some things in advance, it was very obedient this time. It returned the greetings to the girls one by one, then said to Lin Tiandao, Boy Lin, you're such a beast. You've abducted so many girls. Lin Tian's face darkened, and he couldn't help but want to kick it. On this day, the celestial court was more or less lively. Lin Shi held Lin Tian's arm, while Ji Yu and the others sat on the side, asking Lin Tian about all kinds of things that happened in the outside world in the past few years. Big Brother is back? He clearly appeared in the ninth heaven, but he didn't even come to greet his lovely little sister. Let's suppress him later. Bai Qiu gritted her teeth. Lin Tian nodded immediately. Of course, I can provide you with a little help in secret. Wuxing Crocodile couldn't help but roll his eyes. Brother-in-law, no one can do such a thing. Poor brother-in-law. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, half a month passed. In half a month, Lin Tian was always with Lin Shi and Ji Yu, taking the girls to the lower heavens. They visited the barbarian race, the Emergence Dao sect, the Bai family, the Burning Sun sect, the Valley of the Harp, the Northern Flame Empire, and other places. They visited many elders and old friends, gave a lot of gifts, and at the same time, engraved new protective arrays for several major forces. Bai Qiu originally wanted to suppress her brother and lock him in a small dark room for a few days, but after returning to the Bai family, she didn't take action. After all, a group of elders in the family was watching, and she was really embarrassed to do it. At the same time, in the process of traveling to the lower heavens, Lin Tian learned a lot of other things. An old drunkard and Qing Xian never returned to the Burning Sun sect. There has been no news about them in these years, and Fanning Xiong and He Jiao haven't returned since they went out for experience. Where did the old man take mistress? Lin Tian muttered to himself, and then thought of Fan Xiong and He Jiao. Those two guys, I wonder how they are now. When your comes out, I'll ask her to calculate. An old drunkard was very powerful, and Yin couldn't calculate it, but it shouldn't be a problem for her to calculate Fan Xiong and He Jiao. The scorching sun hung in the sky. Half a month later, he brought the girls back to the immortal court from the lower heaven domain. On this day, he and the girls briefly talked about some things, and then left the immortal court, heading towards the ethereal mountain. He was very concerned about Ziyu and the Violet Fairy. His speed was very fast, and it didn't take long for him to reach the center of the ethereal mountain, the ethereal peak. However, Ziyu wasn't on the ethereal peak. Little Yu went to the Fey King Palace. Chapter 1743. Half a month ago, the Violet Fairy had left Misty Peak for the Fey Imperial Palace. Although Purple Moon had stayed on Misty Peak for a few days, she couldn't stay any longer. She wanted to see the Violet Fairy, so she asked AI about the Fey Imperial Palace. AI didn't hide anything and told Ziyu many things about the Demon King Palace, including the location of the Demon King Palace. Then, the next day, Ziyu had disappeared. It didn't take much to figure out that Ziyu went to the Demon King Palace. Lin Tian nodded and said goodbye to Wu Yi. He then left Misty Peak and went to the Demon King Palace. Wu Yi stood on the peak and looked in the direction of the Demon King Palace. His eyes were calm, but he seemed to be thinking about something. Whoosh! Lin Tian was very fast. He left Misty Peak far away in the blink of an eye and came to a vast ancient vein in the eastern region. Looking around, there were groups of celestial mountains in the ancient vein. There were magnificent palaces, which were intertwined with rich spiritual qi and demon qi. Lin Tian came to this place and entered through the main gate of the Demon King Palace, which shocked all the monsters outside. Lord Immortal Emperor! All the monsters bowed. It was known in the cultivation world of the Ten Heavens domain that Lin Tian was the elder brother of a demon king. They also knew that Lin Tian was the master of the immortal court. Now that Lin Tian came to this place, these monsters didn't dare to be negligent. They were all very respectful. Lin Tian didn't put on any airs. He asked one of the monsters, "Did a little girl come here a few days ago? About 16 years old." "Yes, yes." The monster quickly nodded and said, "That girl claimed to be the Demon King's sister, and she was very powerful." These monsters were only at the airborne realm. A few days ago, when Ziyue came here, her aura scared them quite a bit. After all, Ziyue was at the true immortal realm. To airborne realm cultivators, she was practically a god. Where is she now? Lin Tian continued to ask, and in the Demon King's small courtyard. The great demon said, she claimed to be the Demon Emperor's younger sister. No one stopped her. Besides, the great demon was a little embarrassed. No one could stop her. In the Demon King Palace, other than Violet Fairy, who was a half-step immortal king, the other three supreme elders were the strongest. However, their current cultivation bases were merely at the half-step Empyrean realm, so it was impossible for them to stop Violet Moon. Lin Tian nodded. He asked for the exact location of the great demon's Demon Emperor's courtyard, and then stepped into the Demon Emperor's palace. Following the direction indicated by the greater demon, he quickly arrived outside the Demon Emperor courtyard. "Elder sister, can Ziyu massage your shoulders?" As soon as he arrived at the courtyard, he heard the sound. He looked into the courtyard and saw the purple moon circling around the Violet Fairy. Wherever the Violet Fairy went, she would follow. "I told you, I'm not your sister. Get out," the Violet Fairy said in a deep voice. Obviously, Ziyue was very stubborn. Lin Tian didn't enter the Fey Emperor courtyard for the time being. He stood quietly under an ancient tree outside the courtyard and looked inside. Time passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, another half a month had passed. For half a month, Violet Fairy did not go anywhere else but stayed in the small courtyard. Naturally, Purple Moon also stayed in this place. Like a little maid, she followed Violet Fairy around. She served her tea and handed her water. Her face was always full of smiles, and she kept calling her big sister. It was almost as if she was trying to please Violet Fairy. Lin Tian had been staying under the ancient tree outside the small courtyard for half a month. He did not enter the small courtyard, but he quietly observed everything. He then discovered that the Purple Fairy's behavior was very strange. Although it had not been very nice to Ziyue in the past half a month, and had tried to get Ziyue to leave dozens of times, it had not used any forceful means to drive Ziyue away. A strange light flashed in his eyes, and he frowned from time to time. However, he still stayed outside the courtyard and didn't enter. With his current cultivation base at the Immortal King realm, if he wanted to hide his aura and stay here, no one in the Demon Emperor Palace would be able to discover him. Even the Violet Fairy, who was a half-step Immortal King, couldn't. In the blink of an eye, another half a month passed. "Get out! I have nothing to do with you." On this day, the Violet Fairy became very irritated. He slapped away the tea that Ziyue once again brought over. The exquisite teacup fell to the ground and shattered with a crack. The tea splashed all over the ground, and at the same time, some of the tea fell on Ziyue's hands. Ziyue froze. Her hands were wet from the tea, and she was a little dazed. Then, since the incident at Misty Mountain more than a month ago, she revealed a wronged expression for the second time. The Violet Fairy naturally saw this expression and was stunned for a moment. Then he turned around and left. He entered a pavilion in the courtyard and closed the door with a bang. When Lin Tian saw this scene, he frowned again. He no longer stayed outside the courtyard and walked into the Demon Emperor Palace from under the ancient tree. "Ziyue," he called out softly. Ziyu raised her head and looked at him. There were tears in her eyes. She opened her mouth and wanted to say something, but couldn't say anything. Lin Tian was moved. This 16-year-old girl was very innocent. For the past month, she had been circling around the Violet Fairy like a little handmaiden, trying to please her. Now that she was crying, she was a little absent-minded, and he couldn't help but fall silent. After a pause, he opened his mouth again and said to Ziyu, "Wait outside for a while. I'll go in and take a look." Ziyu's tears fell. She didn't say anything and just stared blankly at the pavilion in front of her. Lin Tian sighed. He could feel that the Violet Fairy and Ziyu's bloodline auras were exactly the same. He believed that the two of them were sisters. He didn't think that he would make things so unpleasant when he brought Ziyu back. He paused again and then walked forward. He pushed open the pavilion door and walked in. The interior of the pavilion was very simple and unadorned. There were many ancient books. The Violet Fairy was in the middle of the pavilion. When she saw Lin Tian come in, she was a little moved. She squeezed out a smile, but didn't say anything. "Little Violet, what happened?" Lin Tian looked at her and asked. "Nothing." The Violet Fairy shook her head. Then, she was a little dazed, as if she was thinking about something. Lin Tian looked at her and wanted to ask something, but in the end, he didn't ask. Looking at the Violet Fairy in a daze, he stood in the pavilion and accompanied her. He didn't speak, and the Violet Fairy didn't speak either. She was in a daze from time to time. In the blink of an eye, 7 days had passed. After 7 days, Lin Tian sighed. Only then did he remember that Ziyu was still outside. He pushed open the door of the pavilion and walked out. The small courtyard was still the same. The broken pieces of the teacup on the ground were gone, and the tea leaves on the ground were also gone. It seemed that someone had cleaned up. At the same time, Ziyu was also gone. The girl was no longer in the courtyard. He frowned and spread out his powerful will. In an instant, it enveloped the entire Demon King's palace. However, he still couldn't find any trace of Ziyu. She was no longer in the Demon King's palace. However, in the next moment, he was slightly moved. He looked at the front door of the pavilion. There were many words there. Chapter 1744. There was quite a bit of writing in front of the door. Lin Tian glanced over it and frowned. Inside the pavilion, when Lin Tian opened the door, the Violet Fairy was also looking out of the corner of her eye. She saw the writing in front of the pavilion and couldn't help but walk over to read it. "Big sister, Ziyu has returned. The clan's sacrificial ceremony is about to begin. Ziyu has no time. Although Big Sister doesn't want to acknowledge Ziyu, Ziyu is very, very happy to be able to see Big Sister before she disappears. If you have time in the future, can you go back and pay respects to Mother?" Before she passed away, she kept saying Big Sister's name. The writing was neat and delicate, clearly carved by Ziyu. It looked like it had been done several days ago. The Violet Fairy's face paled, and she trembled visibly. Then she became incomparably anxious. A vast demonic light surged and shot directly into the sky. A crack in the void opened, and she rushed into it and disappeared from this world. Lin Tian was moved. He fully unleashed his Immortal King level cultivation and used his powerful divine will to capture the Violet Fairy's aura. He tore open a large crack in the void and followed after her, disappearing from the Fey Emperor Palace. Darkness covered his field of vision, and in the next moment, it became bright. He appeared in the starry sky and saw the Violet Fairy tear open a path in the starry sky. She rushed in with unparalleled demonic light and demonic might. He was very fast and rushed in before the path disappeared. In the blink of an eye, he appeared beside the Violet Fairy. Darkness covered his field of vision again, and in the next moment, light reappeared. He and the Violet Fairy appeared in a new world. It was the Immortal Region. "Little Violet, what's going on? You and Ziyu have the same bloodline. You should be sisters. Why won't you admit it?" Wui had said before that when the Violet Fairy wanted to talk about such things, she would do it herself. He didn't want to ask too much at first, but now he couldn't help but ask. Also, what is the sacrificial ceremony Ziyu mentioned? What are you so worried about? I can see that Ziyu is talking about the accident you encountered. After that, you didn't lose your memories. These days, He stood outside the Fey Emperor courtyard and silently watched everything for a month. During this time, the Violet Fairy's behavior was too strange. Anyone could see that she was deliberately avoiding something. Accident? Accidentally swallowed by the chaotic space? That's what that man told others. The Violet Fairy gritted her teeth, a self-deprecating expression on her face. That man, the one I should call father, was the one who tore open the chaotic space and pushed me in. As she spoke, she rushed towards the immortal region's eternal immortal region with unconcealable hatred in her eyes. Lin Tian was shocked. What did you say? Without a doubt, the Violet Fairy had already admitted that she was a Fae, and that she was indeed Ziyue's older sister. However, what shocked him the most was that the Violet Fairy's biological father had actually torn open the chaotic space and thrown her into it. The Violet Fairy clenched her teeth. I don't know when it started, but every generation of the Fae would extract the life source from the descendant with the purest bloodline. Then, they would refine the Fae King's bloodline fragments and fuse them with it, hoping to resurrect the Fae King. Once the Fae King is resurrected, the Fae race would have no problem dominating the immortal region. She continued, back then, when I was born, it was said that there were all kinds of visions. Many strong people in the race said that I must be the purest and most powerful Fae with the Fae King's bloodline. At that time, it was said that my father, who was the leader of the Fae race, was very happy. However, after I was born, my Fae bloodline was sealed very tightly and never awakened. Other ordinary Fae can awaken their Fae bloodline at the age of 3, but I didn't even awaken it at the age of 5. That man's face gradually became very ugly to me. At that time, in order to make him happy and let him acknowledge me, even if I knew that after the Fae bloodline awakened and became stronger, my life source would be extracted and I would die, I still worked hard to cultivate day and night. However, until another 3 years passed, the Fae bloodline in my body still didn't move, and there were no signs of awakening. She said somewhat self-deprecatingly, that man must have been very disappointed. Perhaps he felt that I had embarrassed him. Other children of ordinary Fae can awaken their Fae bloodline at the age of 3, but he, the child of the leader of the Fae race, didn't even awaken it at the age of 8. She continued, when I was 8, the adults of the race collectively took the children to the ancient Fae mountains to train. He was always by my side. At first, I was very happy, thinking that he was silently protecting me. So, I worked harder to cultivate in the mountains, worked harder to awaken my Fae bloodline, and worked harder to awaken it. However, what I didn't expect was that while I was working hard to awaken the Fae bloodline sealed in my body, that man, the man I should call father, would suddenly attack me. He directly shattered my spiritual sea, and then threw me into the chaotic space. As she spoke, the hatred in her eyes grew stronger, and her hands couldn't help but clench tightly. Before I lost consciousness, I heard his last words. He said that he didn't need a good-for-nothing descendant. Lin Tian's face turned pale, and he couldn't help but tremble. A man would actually kill his own flesh and blood? He actually said that he didn't need a good-for-nothing descendant? The Violet Fairy spoke again. Originally, anyone would die if their spiritual sea was shattered, but perhaps I wasn't destined to die. After I was thrown into the chaotic space, I accidentally fell into an ancient site in the 10-direction sky domain. The place was surrounded by demonic light, and it was the place where a powerful Fae cultivator from the primordial era passed away. With my spiritual sea shattered, I fell there and coincidentally activated a great technique that the powerful Fae cultivator created before he passed away, which is the great void god slaying Tao that I'm cultivating now. In order to cultivate this technique, the foundation is to first shatter one's own spiritual sea. At that time, my spiritual sea was shattered by him, and at the last moment before I died, I came into contact with the great void god slaying Tao in that ancient site. My dying body automatically activated this divine ability, and I was nourished by this divine ability for a full year. My shattered spiritual sea was reopened, and I survived. I didn't die, but I was left with the disadvantage of losing all my memories and cultivation on a certain day every year. After that, I stayed in the 10 Directions sky domain, never thinking of going back. I sealed away everything that happened in the past, forgetting that I was a fae. I traveled the 10 Directions sky domain as a fae, cultivating and fighting, and finally becoming the master of the fae imperial palace. She continued, all these years, I sealed away everything that happened in the past, but I didn't reveal my name because it was given by my mother. At that time, my fae bloodline hadn't awakened, and only my mother doted on me as usual. Thus, I still kept this name. This is my longing for my mother, and also my guilt towards her. Lin Tion's heart trembled. This 11 or 12-year-old violet fairy actually had such a sad and cruel past. Just as he had guessed, the name Violet Fairy was given to him by his mother, whom he loved dearly. That was why he had kept it. Even though he would lose his cultivation and memories every year after he started cultivating the great void god's slaying way, he still firmly remembered that he was called Violet Fairy. She said that it was her longing for her mother. He knew that she didn't want to return to the Fae race, but she always wanted to see her mother. She said that it was also her guilt towards her mother. He knew that it was because she knew that her disappearance would cause her mother to be incomparably sad and painful. She clearly didn't die, but she never returned to the Fae race because she felt that she had let down her mother. At the same time, he felt anger towards the Fae race's master, and even killing intent rose in his heart. He found it hard to imagine that a man, a father, would actually kill his own flesh and blood, and the reason was only because her bloodline hadn't awakened. Just how much of a beast was this? Violet Moon's so-called sacrificial ceremony in the race is what you said about extracting the life source, and then separating the Fae King's bloodline fragments from the life source. He paused and asked the Violet Fairy. The Violet Fairy gritted her teeth and clenched her hands tightly together. You can't let Violet Moon die. You can't. You can't. She didn't answer Lin Tian directly. Her eyes were full of anxiety and worry, but she also indirectly affirmed Lin Tian's words. Boom! An even more astonishing demonic light appeared outside her body. She directly tore open a space channel and stepped into it. Lin Tian stepped in as well, and then stepped out from another place. The celestial realm was vast and boundless, and they were very far from the eternal immortal state. So, they had to pass through several space channels to reach the eternal immortal state. Not long after, they arrived at an incomparably vast and towering celestial mountain range. As far as the eye could see, the celestial spiritual energy within the celestial mountain range was astonishing. Celestial spiritual light intertwined, floating in the air. At the center of the mountain range was a large number of divine pavilions, intertwined with the aura of time. This was where the Fae had established their race. When Lin Tian and the Violet Fairy arrived, the first thing they heard was the sound of a bell ringing out from the depths of the main Fae territory. It carried with it a sense of vicissitudes, and there was a divine essence intertwined within. The Violet Fairy's expression changed. She knew all too well that this was the sign that the Fae's sacrificial ceremony was about to begin. For a time, she rushed forward like a humanoid bolt of lightning, her speed frightening. Who is it? Halt! Outside the Fae territory, there were naturally Fae cultivators standing guard. When they saw the Violet Fairy rushing over, they immediately rushed forward with their spears and shouted, "Get out of my way!" A boundless Fae might shook, turning into a hurricane that swept out, directly blowing away several Fae cultivators that were rushing forward. The Fae's main gate was torn apart, and the Fae rushed into the Fae territory, heading deep into the Fae territory. Lin Tian followed beside the Violet Fairy, maintaining the same speed as the Violet Fairy. How dare you barge into my Fae territory? You have some guts. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. More than 20 Fae powerhouses appeared in succession. All of them were at the half-step Immortal King realm, and the aura they exuded was extremely tyrannical. Get out of my way! The Violet Fairy's expression was anxious. As she spoke, a sound wave swept forward. Puff, puff, puff. Chapter 1745. Dozens of half-step immortal kings were sent flying, each of them coughing up blood and unable to stand up again. The Violet Fairy didn't look at these people at all and went straight into the depths of the Fey race. Lin Tian followed beside the Violet Fairy. He was worried for Ziyu, but at the same time, he was moved by the Violet Fairy's combat strength. Just one word was enough to shatter dozens of half-step immortal kings at the same level. Such combat strength was really amazing. Boom! 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 Divine energy surged and immortal pressure intertwined. There were many experts in the Fey race. In the blink of an eye, a large group of Fey experts appeared. Among them, there were 7 early-stage immortal kings. Each of them had a majestic essence. Since ancient times, no one has dared to break into our Fey race like this. How dare you be so presumptuous during our race's sacrificial ceremony? One of the immortal kings said coldly. Immediately, a large amount of immortal king light shot forward. Unparalleled immortal king pressure enveloped Lin Tian and the Violet Fairy at the same time. Clang! Divine light clanged like sword chi. The Violet Fairy rushed forward. The great void god-slaying light was vast and mighty, cutting through the void and the immortal pressure. It directly entered the body of the person who spoke. Puff! Blood splattered everywhere. Under the shocked eyes of the Fey experts, the immortal king who spoke was directly cut into pieces. Lin Tian's expression changed again. Although that person was at the initial stage of the immortal king realm, he was still an immortal king after all. But now, the Violet Fairy was actually able to shatter him with a single strike with her half-step immortal king realm cultivation base. At the same time, this also gave him a new understanding of the great void god, slaying Tao. This kind of divine technique required one to first shatter one's own sea of consciousness. This kind of cultivation condition could be said to be destructive and harsh to the extreme. It was almost impossible to cultivate. But once it was cultivated, the power it possessed was really shocking. Just like the Violet Fairy now, she was extremely powerful. Boom! At this time, another bell sound came from the depths of the Fey race. More immortal light intertwined, mixed with a stronger divine essence. The Violet Fairy looked into the depths, and her expression clearly became more anxious. With a boom, her demonic might was fully displayed. The great void, god-slaying light turned into a sea of light, covering the sky of this place. The terrifying might caused the other 6 celestial kings to tremble involuntarily. Together, they pressed down on the 6 celestial kings, attacking everyone indiscriminately. Retreat! These people were shaken, and they all retreated. It was hard for them to imagine that a mere half-step immortal king, who was separated from them by an entire realm, could actually emit such a terrifying aura. It actually made them, who were immortal kings, clearly feel that it was difficult to contend against him. The power of the great void god, slaying light, was unparalleled. Everywhere it passed, all living things were destroyed and withered. The 6 celestial kings retreated again and again. They were not hit by the great void god slaying light, but they coughed up blood from the shock of that aura. As the other Fey cultivators saw this, they couldn't help but be shocked. A mere half-step immortal king was actually able to force several immortal king-level experts of their clan to the point of coughing up blood. A half-step immortal king actually caused you to suffer such injuries? How did you cultivate to this level? A cold voice rang out, and a gray figure stepped forward, leaving behind afterimages with each step. This was an old man. His aura was extremely dense, and there was no doubt that he was at the peak of the immortal king realm. Ninth Elder, a Fey cultivator said, and bowed from afar. The few immortal kings who were knocked back had ugly expressions on their faces. The immortal kings who had been shattered earlier also had ugly expressions on their faces when they reformed their bodies. It was difficult for them to refute, because as immortal kings, they were indeed injured by a half-step immortal king, and they didn't even have the strength to resist. This was really embarrassing. Boom! The third bell rang out in the depths of the Fey race. There was a faint immortal radiance in the sky, very obvious. The great void god, slaying light, surged around the violet fairy's body. She rushed directly in the direction of the bell ring, becoming even more anxious. The ninth elder of the Fey race snorted coldly. Since ancient times, no one has dared to break into my Fey race, let alone a half-step immortal king. As he spoke, he directly raised his hand. A giant palm print of light blotted out the sky and directly pressed down on the violet fairy. With a rumble, the power of a peak immortal king surged, shaking the world in all directions. The immortal pressure was intimidating. Die! This person looked at the violet fairy coldly. In the blink of an eye, the giant palm print that blotted out the sky pressed down on the violet fairy's head. It was also at this time that Lin Tian moved. With a wave of his hand, a beam of sword light shot out. Clang! The sound of the sword was ear-piercing, slashing out in all directions. With a poof, it shattered the giant palm print that was pressing down. The blood of a peak immortal king splattered everywhere. The ninth elder of the Fey race who attacked staggered backwards. This, all around, the crowd of Fey cultivators turned pale. At this time, their eyes fell directly on Lin Tian. Lin Tian and the Violet Fairy rushed into the Fey race together. But before this, the one who attacked was the Violet Fairy. They had almost ignored Lin Tian and were only shocked by the strength of the Violet Fairy. But now, Lin Tian's first move had shocked them. With a casual wave of his hand, he had injured their peak immortal king Ninth Elder. Let's go. Lin Tian looked into the depths of the Fey race. He pulled the Violet Fairy and directly stepped into the depths of the Fey race. During this month, he had silently watched the Violet Fairy and Ziyu from outside the Fey Emperor's courtyard. The Violet Fairy was constantly throwing tantrums at Ziyu, denying the fact that she was a Fey. She did not recognize Ziyu as her little sister, but she was so pure and lovable. She was so fawning over her little sister, serving her tea and giving her water. How could the Violet Fairy's heart not soften? No matter how much she loathed the Fey race, she still had the shadow of her little sister in her heart. Otherwise, how could she have rushed to the Fey race so anxiously after seeing those words left behind by Ziyu? You're courting death. The Patriarch and the Highest Elder are presiding over the sacrificial ceremony. Where are you going to cause trouble? The Ninth Elder of the Fey race naturally saw the direction in which Lin Tian was pulling the Violet Fairy. With a bang, he held up an Immortal King weapon. With a mighty and unparalleled divine might, it pressed down on Lin Tian and the Violet Fairy with a destructive force. Die here together. With a bang, the Immortal King weapon combined with his peak Immortal King level divine might directly destroyed all 10 directions of space. That kind of momentum was incomparably terrifying. Lin Tian's eyes were cold. Scram! As he spat out a word, with a crack, the Immortal King weapon that the Ninth Elder of the Fey race had brought out was shattered into pieces. Then, a majestic force spread out and landed on the Ninth Elder's body. With a poof, it shattered him into pieces. Such a scene caused all the cultivators in this place to tremble again. It was just a word, but it had shattered an Immortal King weapon. Then, it had shattered their peak Immortal King Ninth Elder. What kind of combat power was this? Lin Tian did not care about the expressions of these people. He pulled the Violet Fairy and quickly went straight into the depths of the Fey race. Chapter 1746. Pulling the Violet Fairy along, Lin Tian's Immortal King aura intertwined around his body. His speed was very fast, and in the blink of an eye, he was already far away from the Fey territory. Not long after, he pulled the Violet Fairy into the depths of the Fey territory. Looking around, there was a crimson land in front of them, as if it had been dyed red by the blood of 10,000 creatures. It gave off a horrifying feeling, and a bit of the smell of blood floated in the air. Boom! 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 The sound of a bell reverberated, and it sounded 3 times in a row, coming from the center of this crimson land. Lin Tian could clearly feel that the Violet Fairy was even more anxious, and his palms were sweating. He knew that as the bell continued to ring, the more it rang, the more danger Ziyu was in. So, when the Violet Fairy heard the bell ring more often, his expression became more anxious. He didn't say much, and with the Violet Fairy's Immortal King cultivation base, he used the yin-yang steps and headed towards the center of this crimson land. The bell ring was coming from there. "Who is it? How dare you intrude into our holy land?" A cold voice mixed with killing intent rang out, and 5 figures blocked the way, all of them intertwined with half-step true god aura. It was clear that these 5 people were powerhouses of the Fey race. When the Fey's so-called sacrificial ceremony began, they had been guarding this place. At this time, as they saw Lin Tian and the Violet Fairy intrude, their eyes turned icy cold. What are the people of the race doing? They actually allowed 2 outsiders to intrude here. Why isn't anyone stopping them? We'll hold them accountable later. First, suppress them. Suppress? Just obliterate them. The other people's voices were cold. As soon as the words fell, one of them directly attacked. A large palm imprint mixed with killing intent directly pressed down on Lin Tian and the Violet Fairy. With a rumble, the entire sky was enveloped by the palm's power. The power of a half-step true god was strong and oppressive. Scram! Lin Tian's voice was cold, and he still only said these 2 words. The majestic Immortal King pressure turned into a hurricane that swept out. In an instant, the palm of light was shattered, and the Immortal King aura landed on him and the other 4 half-step true gods, causing them to be sent flying, each of them coughing out large mouthfuls of blood. Even though the Violet Fairy was extremely anxious and worried about Ziyu's safety, she still couldn't help but reveal a surprised expression when she saw this scene. She didn't expect Lin Tian to have become so powerful in just a few years. Boom! The 7th bell chime came from the center of the Red Land, causing the Violet Fairy to tremble once again. The surprise on her face at Lin Tian's strength disappeared in the blink of an eye. Lin Tian didn't say anything. Naturally, he could feel the Violet Fairy's anxiety. He didn't care about the half-step true gods who were sent flying by his Immortal King aura at all. He directly used the duality steps and rushed toward the center of the Red Land with the Violet Fairy. Ziyu, that girl was pure and kind. She was clearly a true immortal, but back then, she was very enthusiastic about the ordinary villagers who had been suppressed by the cultivators of the world of souls to be used as cultivation materials. She took the initiative to treat their injuries, and when she was thanked by them, she looked panicked. It was only because those people who bowed to her were older than her. He quite liked that girl. This kind of liking wasn't love, but he felt that the girl was really good. She was so pure and kind that she was likable. Most importantly, she was the Violet Fairy's sister. Not to mention anything else, just because the Violet Fairy was worried about her, he couldn't let anything happen to her. He used the duality steps and moved very quickly. In the blink of an eye, he had pulled the Violet Fairy far away. It didn't take long for them to arrive at the center of the Red Land. As far as the eye could see, there was a circular altar in front of them. It was covered with dense runes, and a girl lay in the center. It was the 16-year-old Ziyu. At this time, her eyes were closed, and her body seemed to have lost control. Her life fluctuations were rapidly fading away, and strands of light flowed from her body into the altar in the sky directly above the altar. Ziyu, the Violet Fairy couldn't help but call out. She broke free from Lin Tian's hand and ran toward the circular altar. Buzz! Outside the circular altar, a halo appeared. It was like a powerful barrier, and it directly shook her back. Clearly, there was a very powerful restriction outside the altar. At the same time, a cold voice came from the altar in the sky. Who dares to intrude here? On the altar, 10 figures sat together in a circle. 9 of them were old men, and 1 was middle-aged. Lin Tian was slightly moved. Although he saw the altar before, he didn't notice that there were people on it. At this time, he looked at the 10 people, and then his eyes narrowed. The 10 of them were all in the divine realm. 9 of them were in the early stage of the true god realm, and the middle-aged man was in the middle stage of the true god realm. 10 true gods. He couldn't help but think of some things recorded in the ancient books of the immortal realm. It recorded that the top inheritances of the 12 immortal continents all had no less than 10 true gods overseeing them. Now it seemed that it was true. Outsiders dare to intrude into our clan's forbidden area? What are those people outside doing? One of the 9 old men had a cold expression. The other 8 old men and the middle-aged man in the middle stage of the true god realm also had cold expressions, and they were all filled with killing intent. However, at this time, they were all sitting cross-legged on the altar, condensing some kind of seal. It was obvious that they were presiding over some kind of ceremony, and it was difficult for them to do anything else. At this time, no one immediately stood up to attack Lin Tian and the Violet Fairy. Boom! Boundless demonic might filled the air. The Violet Fairy had also sensed the presence of the 9 old men and the middle-aged man. However, at that moment, she did not even bother to look at the 10 of them. Instead, she unleashed the great void god slaying way to its very limits, madly slashing at the barrier. She looked anxiously at the violet moon at the center of the altar. The violet moon's life source was quickly draining away. At this time, when the void god slaying Tao was used to its limit, the aura was truly frightening and powerful. However, the restrictive barrier outside the altar was too strong. Even if the Violet Fairy used the Void God, slaying Tao to its limit, she couldn't damage the barrier in the slightest. However, the expressions of the 10 people on the altar in the sky changed, and their gazes all fell on the Violet Fairy. This is, although it's very weak, as if deliberately sealed, there is indeed demonic energy fluctuations on her body. It's very pure. What's going on? Why does she have the bloodline fluctuations of our clan? Moreover, it's very similar to the unique aura of Huaikong and the Violet Moon. The 9 old men couldn't help but look at the middle-aged man in purple robes. A few days ago, the Violet Moon snuck out, saying that she felt her sister's aura. Could it be? One of them seemed to have thought of something. He looked at the Violet Fairy, then at the middle-aged man in purple robes, and then at the Violet Fairy again. Could it be that little girl, the Violet Fairy, who was accidentally swallowed by the chaotic space? She's actually not dead? And she's already awakened the demonic bloodline. The fluctuations of the demonic bloodline are actually so pure. That's right, it's that little girl from back then. She's actually... Now, as the Violet Fairy fully activated the Void God, slaying Tao, her body uncontrollably emitted the aura of the origin. Even though the 9 people didn't have the pure demonic bloodline that the Violet Moon had, nor were they as close as the Violet Moon and the Violet Fairy sisters, they could still sense the pure demonic bloodline that the Violet Fairy possessed. In addition, the Violet Fairy's birth had been accompanied by all kinds of strange phenomena, so they had a deep impression of the Violet Fairy's potential. With these 2 factors combined, they were able to directly confirm that this was the Violet Fairy from back then. The middle-aged man in purple robes' gaze fell on the Violet Fairy, who was using the wind control technique to slash at the barrier outside the altar. His cold eyes couldn't help but narrow slightly. Someone who should have been dead had actually reappeared here after so many years. Moreover, she clearly had the aura of an incomparably pure demonic bloodline, purer than any demonic bloodline of the previous generations. Violet Fairy, you're still alive. When did your demonic bloodline awaken? Looking at the Violet Fairy, the middle-aged man in purple robes spoke in a cold voice. The Violet Fairy didn't seem to hear the middle-aged man's voice. The Void God slaying Tao was even stronger and more shocking as it slashed at the barrier in front of her. Seeing that the Violet Fairy didn't respond to him, the middle-aged man in purple robes' expression darkened. He said coldly, "Father is asking you a question. Answer." Clang! The ear-piercing sound of a sword resounded as Lin Tian made his move. A golden sword beam slashed straight at the middle-aged man in purple robes, carrying with it an undisguised cold, killing intent. He could tell that this middle-aged man in purple robes was Zi Huaikong, the man who should be the Violet Fairy and Zi Yu's father. He was the man who had shattered the Violet Fairy's sea of consciousness and pushed her into the chaotic space. This man who had once tried to kill the Violet Fairy, his own flesh and blood. Now that he saw that the Violet Fairy was still alive, He actually had the face to act like a father to the Violet Fairy. His heart was burning with anger. Even if he knew that his opponent was a mid-stage true god, even if he knew that he couldn't hurt him with his current strength, he still slashed out with his sword. At the same time, he made his move. He activated the Heavenly One Soul technique, the Dragon Burial Scripture, and the Chaos Empyrean Fist, and directly smashed a punch at the barrier outside the altar. Dong! This punch was a mix of 3 stunning arts from the past and present. It was extremely shocking. When it landed on the barrier outside the altar, it caused the barrier to tremble. With a crack, a large crack appeared. Such a scene caused the expressions of the 10 people on the altar to change. The middle-aged man in purple robes sat cross-legged on the altar. He was the core leader of the sacrificial ceremony. At this moment, he used his divine might to shatter Lin Tian's sword beam. Then his gaze fell on Lin Tian. An early-stage immortal king can actually shake the barrier here. His voice was cold. Then, he said to an elder among the 9 people, "Seventh forefather, you go and kill him. The 9 of us can barely maintain the sacrificial ceremony. As for the Violet Fairy, suppress her and send her to the altar. Now that her fairy bloodline has awakened, she can participate in the sacrificial ceremony." "Are you sure?" The 7th forefather of the fairy race said, "On this day, Ziyu will sacrifice her life for the race. Now that the Violet Fairy is alive, you still have a descendant. This is a pleasant surprise. Now, are you really going to suppress her and send her to the altar? Everything is for the return of the ancestors, for the prosperity of the fairy race." Zi Huaikong's voice was cold. Chapter 1747. Lin Tian naturally heard Zi Huaikong's words, and his heart couldn't help but become even colder. How could there be such a father in this world? Boom! The divine power emanating from his body became denser, and the divine One Soul incantation, the Dragon Burial Scripture, and the Chaos Emperor's Fist were used together once again. Once again, his fist landed firmly on the barrier outside the altar. With a cracking sound, the barrier was directly shattered by his punch. Then, he pulled the Violet Fairy and rushed toward the altar in front of him. It was also at this moment that the 7th fairy ancestor came down from the altar in the sky with a boom. Divine power intertwined around his body, and he reached out with his left hand, and a palm print of divine light mercilessly pressed down on Lin Tian with cold, killing intent. At the same time, his other hand grabbed toward the Violet Fairy. Since the fairy bloodline has been awakened, then contribute to the return of the ancestors. His voice was cold and emotionless, and the divine power of the 2 light palms that were pressed down surged, and the aura was extremely oppressive. "Get lost!" Lin Tian rushed toward the altar with the Violet Fairy, but he had been paying attention to the 10 people on the altar. At this time, when he saw this person pressing down on him, he immediately attacked, and a simple punch was thrown toward him. This punch looked very simple, but it was many times more terrifying than the 2 punches that he had used to continuously bombard the barrier outside the altar. It instantly shattered the void in all directions, and the pure strength of his body was shocking. With 2 cracking sounds, the 2 large palms that the 7th fairy ancestor had conjured were directly shattered. Then, Lin Tian's punch didn't slow down, and in the next moment, it landed on this person's body. Poof! Blood splattered everywhere, and this person immediately exploded. Suddenly, the other 8 elders on the altar all changed color, and even Zi Huaikong, who was a mid-stage true god, narrowed his eyes slightly. They could see that Lin Tian's cultivation was only close to the mid-stage of the Immortal King realm, but at this level of cultivation, he was able to shatter a true god with 1 punch. What kind of terrifying physique was this? Even the Barbarian King physique of the 12 King physiques was not as terrifying as this. Lin Tian did not care about the 7th fairy forefather's body that had been blown to pieces. Instead, he kept his guard up against the other 9 people who were hosting the ritual on the altar while pulling the Violet Fairy along as he continued to rush towards the altar. Boom! The 7th forefather, who had been smashed to pieces, reformed his physical body. His eyes were filled with shock, and his expression was unsightly. He rushed toward Lin Tian with even greater speed. Junior! His eyes were filled with killing intent. He was a dignified true god, yet now his body was actually shattered by a single punch from a young, celestial king. This was truly an extremely great humiliation. In the next moment, with a boom, he used a special movement technique to block in front of Lin Tian and directly used an astonishing divine technique. Lin Tian pulled on the Violet Fairy and charged forward without slowing down at all. A divine map rushed out from behind him. It was like a sacred map of the creation of the heavens, but also like a millstone that could destroy the world. It interweaved with holiness, majesty, and vastness, and directly crushed towards the opponent. For this attack, he directly used the reincarnation map. This was because the opponent was a true god. With his cultivation level close to the mid-stage of the immortal king realm, his physique of reincarnation, and his cultivation of withstanding the power of 2 consecutive heavenly tribulations, he was now strong enough to be fearless of an early-stage true god. However, a true god was a true god after all. It was naturally not easy for him to defeat a true god who had used a powerful divine technique with his cultivation level of the immortal king realm. Swish! With a soft sound, the divine technique that the 7th fairy forefather had used collided with the reincarnation map and was immediately shattered. Then, the reincarnation map pressed down mightily and directly crashed into the forefather's body. Poof! Blood splattered. Once again, the forefather's physical body exploded, and only his divine soul was preserved. He was shocked and angry. He was a true god, and now that he had used a divine technique, he was still shattered by Lin Tian, who was at the immortal king realm. Lin Tian's eyes were emotionless. He pulled the Violet Fairy and rushed past. At the same time, he threw out a slap and landed on the forefather's divine soul. With a bang, the forefather's divine soul flew out. A dozen cracks appeared on it, and it almost shattered directly. How is this possible? The other 8 elders who were presiding over the sacrificial ceremony on the altar turned pale again. The 7th fairy forefather, who had used a divine technique and had a true god-level cultivation, was actually still shattered. It was shattered by a cultivator at the immortal king realm. Even Zi Huaikong, who was at the middle stage of the true god level, narrowed his eyes again. His gaze fell on Lin Tian without blinking. Lin Tian didn't care about the 7th fairy forefather. With his current battle strength, even if he wanted to kill the 7th fairy forefather, he could do it. However, that would require him to use all of his strength, and it would take a long time. But now, he obviously didn't have that time. Now, he had to rescue Ziyu from the altar. Ziyu's life force was constantly surging into the altar in the sky. Obviously, if this dragged on for too long, Ziyu would completely disappear and die. Whoosh! He was extremely fast. Pulling the Violet Fairy, he arrived at the edge of the circular altar in the blink of an eye. Wong! When he arrived, the void hummed, and another forbidden boundary appeared. It was blood-red in color and was very powerful. Divine light intertwined in his eyes. He circulated the Tianyi Soul technique to the extreme. Gathering the power of this array, he threw a punch at the blood-red boundary and landed directly on it. With a bang, the blood-red boundary immediately shook and twisted violently. His body was also shaken violently. Obviously, the blood-red boundary here was many times stronger than the one he had shattered at the periphery. Damn you! An angry voice rang out. The 7th fairy forefather reformed his physical body and attacked again. His divine aura surged like a divine waterfall. Lin Tian tilted his head and looked at the 7th fairy forefather with an extremely cold gaze. The 7th fairy forefather, who was rushing over, trembled for no reason. Facing such a cold gaze, he felt as if his throat was being strangled by a pair of demonic hands. It was as if he would be strangled in the next moment. It was also at this time that Zi Huaikong on the altar moved. In the blink of an eye, he appeared at the edge of the altar and blocked Lin Tian and the Violet Fairy. 7th Forefather, Go back and preside over the ceremony with the other 8 forefathers. Leave them to me." His voice was cold. When he said these words, his gaze fell on Lin Tian and the Violet Fairy. Cold light intertwined in his eyes. The 7th fairy forefather glanced coldly at Lin Tian, then immediately rose into the air and returned to the altar. He immediately presided over the ceremony with the other 8 elders. This kind of ceremony required at least 9 true gods to preside over together. Lin Tian's gaze fell on Zi Huaikong, and the cold light in his eyes became even more intense. Little Zi, back off. He let go of the Violet Fairy's hand and took a step forward. Boom! Chapter 1748. Zi Huaikong was at the peak of the true god realm. Lin Tian could feel how powerful this person was. With his current combat strength, even if he used all his means, it was impossible for him to be a match for this person. The difference in cultivation was too great. But even so, he couldn't retreat because of this. Ziyu was on the altar at this moment, and her life aura was constantly draining away. The Violet Fairy's face was full of anxiety. No matter what, he had to bring Ziyu down from the altar. Boom! The mighty immortal king aura rushed into the sky. The space in all directions trembled, and the earth shook. This aura was extremely oppressive, causing the 9 Fey ancestors on the altar to reveal looks of shock. They couldn't believe it. Lin Tian's cultivation was close to the mid-stage of the Immortal King realm, but this kind of Immortal King aura made them, who were at the true God realm, tremble and feel a great threat. Who the hell is this person? How can he emit such a fierce aura at this cultivation realm? The 9 Fey ancestors' eyelids couldn't help but twitch. The Violet Fairy was standing behind Lin Tian at this time. She felt the aura emitted by Lin Tian. Even though she was extremely worried about Ziyu's safety, she still couldn't help but reveal a shocked expression. Then, she looked at Ziyu, whose life aura was constantly draining away, and her face revealed an extremely anxious expression. Brother, she looked at Lin Tian and couldn't finish her words. She wanted to bring Ziyu down from the altar and not let Ziyu die, but her strength was far from enough. She wasn't that strong. Now, in this place, she could only rely on Lin Tian. Lin Tian naturally knew what she wanted to say. He knew that she didn't want anything to happen to Ziyu. She wanted to take Ziyu away and let Ziyu live. At this time, she didn't even look at her biological father, Zi Huaikong, who had killed her with his own hands. Therefore, Lin Tian could feel how worried she was about Ziyu. "You must save her," he said in a deep voice. As his words fell, the aura on his body became stronger with a bang. Strands of purple lightning intertwined around his body, mixing with the golden divine light and pure yang flames, directly crushing a large area of space. Not bad at all. In front of him, outside the altar, Zi Huaikong looked at Lin Tian and said, "You're comparable to some of the young paragons in the top 10 of the ranking of 100 immortals. If you're willing to submit to my clan and serve us, and willingly brand yourself with the official prince seal, I won't kill you and let you live." The vassal prince's seal was a part of the vassal prince's mother seal. The child seal was branded on the cultivator who submitted to it, and the mother seal was controlled by the cultivator who submitted to it. After that, the cultivator branded with the vassal prince's mother seal would not be able to resist the cultivator who had the vassal prince's mother seal. The cultivator who had the vassal prince's mother seal could easily kill the cultivator branded with the vassal prince's mother seal. It was an absolute contract divine spell. However, in order to carry out this kind of contract magic, the subject had to be willing to be branded with the prince's seal. It was impossible to be forced to do so. Lin Tian looked at Zi Huaikong with a cold gaze. He did not say anything, and in the next moment he moved, turning into a human-shaped torch and charging towards the other party. Dong! He directly swung the Chaos Emperor's fist. At the same time, the reincarnation diagram was utilized at the first possible moment, and it pressed down towards Zi Huaikong in a mighty manner. When facing an expert at the intermediate stage of the true God realm, It was utterly impossible for him to hold back in battle with his own strength. He had to attack with his full strength. Clang! An ear-piercing sound reverberated as a battle spear appeared. Its entire body was covered in strange markings, and it emanated the formidable might of an immortal king. This was the ancient weapon an old drunkard had given him when he sent him into the immortal domain. However, in order to prevent him from relying too much on this battle spear, an old drunkard had set up a seal within it. After he used it once, the seal would naturally be unlocked, and it would only be broken when he attained the immortal king realm. At this moment, he utilized this battle spear. As this battle spear was utilized, an extremely terrifying aura surged. It was as if it had killed countless living beings, and it naturally carried a terrifying killing intent that seemed capable of piercing through all things. Zi Huaikong's eyes narrowed slightly, and he was moved by Lin Tian's attack at this moment. However, in the next moment, his eyes became extremely icy cold, and he said indifferently, "I gave you a chance to live, yet you didn't cherish it. Idiot." As he spoke, he directly made a move and slapped forward with his palm. This palm was naturally not a simple physical attack, and it carried a shocking fluctuation of divine might. It suppressed everything at the first possible moment, and it shattered all the divine might that Lin Tian struck out. After that, it directly descended onto the immortal king Great Battle Spear in Lin Tian's hand. Clang! A crisp sound of metal resounded. Lin Tian trembled fiercely and was blasted back by a few steps. Under the circumstances where there were already many cracks on the immortal king Great Battle Spear in his hand, a few more cracks appeared on it. This caused him to have no choice but to admit the strength of an intermediate stage true god. Even though it was only a small level higher than an initial stage true god, the difference in combat strength between them was shocking. An immortal king was able to block this palm strike. Not bad. Zi Huaikong spoke coldly. Lin Tian didn't say anything, but his eyes were very cold. With a bang, the aura he emitted became even stronger, and he charged towards Zi Huaikong again. He used the battle spear in his hand to activate the heavenly sword scripture and slashed out a sky full of heavenly sword light. After that, he directly threw the battle spear in his hand out, and it transformed into a dragon of death that pierced towards Zi Huaikong. Zi Huaikong's expression was cold. He unleashed the divine might of an intermediate stage true god, and with a slap, he shattered the heavenly sword light that filled the sky. Moreover, he slapped the battle spear away, and it stabbed into the ground in the distance with a clang, causing even more cracks to appear on it. "I'll give you one more chance. Submit or die," Zi Huaikong said. "Submit to a bastard who kills his daughter just because she hasn't awakened her fairy bloodline by the age of 8? Lin Tian spoke. Zi Huaikong's eyes immediately darkened, and he glanced at the violet fairy at the side. Then he looked at Lin Tian, and his gaze became even colder. At the same time, on the altar, the other 9 fairy ancestors were moved. They presided over the sacrificial ceremony while looking at the violet fairy and Zi Huaikong. The fairy bloodline had not awakened at the age of 8, and in the history of the fairy race, only the violet fairy had done so. According to Lin Tian's words, it was Zi Huaikong who had killed the violet fairy back then, and she hadn't been accidentally devoured by the chaotic space. "Huaikong, what's going on? Didn't you say that the girl was accidentally devoured by the chaotic space?" The fairy ancestor frowned. The other 8 elders also looked at Zi Huaikong, and they all frowned. Zi Huaikong glanced at the violet fairy and said, "That's right, I was the one who killed her." As he said this, his expression didn't change in the slightest, and he continued indifferently. Back then, when she was born, the sky was filled with strange phenomena, and the clan had great expectations for her. That generation was waiting for her to grow up and contribute to the return of the ancestors. But she hadn't awakened her fairy bloodline by the age of 8, and was unable to contribute to the return of the ancestors. I felt that it was impossible for her to awaken her fairy bloodline, and if we continued to wait with expectations and didn't choose anyone else, it would delay the return of the ancestors, so at that time, I killed her. At that time, I said it was an accident, but I didn't want to make Yueshi feel bad. Yueshi, full name Ling Yueshi, was the mother of the Violet Fairy and Ziyu. On the altar, the 9 elders frowned, and then they couldn't help but sigh. Back then, if we had waited for the girl to awaken her fairy bloodline, but never did, it would have affected the choice of other people to sacrifice, and it would have indeed affected the return of the ancestors. It was right to hide it from Yueshi. If Yueshi knew the truth back then, she probably wouldn't have been able to bear it, and something irreversible might have happened. AI, for the return of the ancestors, for the prosperity of our Fey race, you sacrificed too much. The 9 elders looked at Zi Huaikong. Lin Tian looked at the 9 elders on the altar, and couldn't help but sneer. You all seem to admire a beast who killed his own flesh and blood just because her fairy bloodline hadn't awakened for a long time? Ignorant child, what do you know? The 9 elders looked coldly at Lin Tian and said, do you know how important the return of the ancestors is to our race? Even if it's delayed for a day or two, it will be a great loss to our race's future. The earlier the ancestors return, the more powerful our Fey race will be in the future. Do you know how important this is? It's higher than the heavens. Fuck your bullshit significance. Lin Tianling's face was cold. This kind of thing is worse than pigs and dogs. And in your mouth, it's higher than the heavens. His eyes were ruthless. If I had great power now, I would directly destroy your Fey race. The 9 elders' eyes were even colder. Insolent Junior, you speak rudely. There's no need to talk nonsense with him. Just kill him, Zi Huaikong said. His tone was indifferent, and he glanced at the Violet Fairy. After killing him, send her to the altar. Since her fairy bloodline has awakened, and it's unexpectedly pure, then she'll carry out her duty back then and sacrifice it to the ancestors. His voice was indifferent and emotionless, and he walked towards Lin Tian. He directly raised his hand, and a divine light palm print appeared, covering the sky and covering the sun, and his aura was extremely powerful. Bastard, Lin Tianling said, and directly brought out the nameless Great Tao, the Thunder Immortal Tao, and the Natural Immortal Tao, and merged with the reincarnation diagram to form the most powerful Immortal Tao reincarnation diagram, and mightily faced Zi Huaikong. Moreover, at the same time, divine light interweaved in his eyes, and he used the weapon control technique, which he hadn't used in a long time. He moved the battle spear from a distance, causing it to soar into the sky, turning it into a light dragon that pierced towards the barrier outside the altar. It bloomed with an incomparably dazzling brilliance, and its momentum was extremely terrifying. Zi Huaikong was slightly moved, as he didn't expect Lin Tianling to be able to move the battle spear in the air while attacking him at the same time, emitting such a powerful force to attack the barrier outside the altar. He immediately reached out and grabbed the battle spear. However, it was a little too late. Lin Tianling had spoken to Zi Huaikong and the other 9 people just now to secretly accumulate power on the battle spear, so that it could break the barrier outside the altar in an instant. At this time, he suddenly made such a move, and Zi Huaikong couldn't stop him. Chi! With a soft sound, the battle spear landed on the barrier outside the altar and directly shattered the barrier. At the same time, he moved again, using the yin and yang steps to the limit, and rushed towards the altar. Zi Huaikong couldn't stop the battle spear from breaking the barrier outside the altar, and his expression became even colder. He directly raised his hand, and the most powerful divine power pressed down on Lin Tianling. So what if you broke the last barrier? Don't even think about trying to destroy the sacrificial ceremony. Chapter 1749. Middle stage, true, God-level divine power interweaved in this space. Its power was extremely frightening, sealing off every corner around Lin Tian as it pressed down on Lin Tian. Lin Tian did not retreat. He used the 5 Thunder Sky Shock technique, using the shocking thunder technique together with the yin and yang steps to increase his speed instantly. He forcefully avoided the divine power that Zi Huaikong was pressing down on him and continued to rush toward the altar. Zi Huaikong was moved by Lin Tian's speed. However, in the next moment, His expression became cold again. He snorted coldly and blocked Lin Tian in a flash. Once again, he used the giant palm of divine power to press down on Lin Tian. With a rumble, the space all around trembled. Affected by the power of a mid-stage true god, it shattered inch by inch like fragile glass. Lin Tian immediately knew that it was difficult to avoid with his speed. He gritted his teeth and used the 5 Thunder Sky Shock technique to its limit. He also used various other precious techniques. The sword and fist light were like rolling waves as they bombarded Zi Huaikong head-on. "You're not weak, but you're no match for me," Zi Huaikong said coldly. Whoosh! The sound of the air being torn rang out. At this time, the violet fairy moved and rushed toward the altar that was no longer protected by the barrier. "You think I didn't notice you?" Zi Huaikong said, his voice indifferent. He waved his hand, and a beam of divine light fell on the violet fairy. With a bang, the violet fairy was sent flying. "I won't kill you now. Your life will be dedicated to the ancestors. This is your duty." The violet fairy landed in the distance, blood flowing from her mouth. However, her eyes were still fixed on the altar in the distance. She did not even look at Zi Huaikong. Now, she only cared about Ziyu's life. Boom! Shocking coldness and anger exploded in Lin Tian's eyes. The divine light outside his body burned even more fiercely, shaking the sky. All kinds of divine techniques and ancient scriptures were activated to the limit. His immortal power was intimidating as it pressed down on Zi Huaikong. At the same time, the violet fairy struggled to stand up and rushed toward the altar again. Her speed was even faster than before. "Just lie there and don't make a fool of yourself." Zi Huaikong raised his hand and threw another beam of divine light at the violet fairy. Lin Tian stepped forward and appeared beside the violet fairy with extreme speed. He used the reincarnation diagram to crush the divine light. "You still have time to care about others?" Zi Huaikong's voice rang out once again. In the instant that Lin Tian blocked the divine light for the violet fairy, a large amount of killing intent mixed with divine might directly press down upon them. This time, Lin Tian had nowhere to run. All he could do was put up a defensive barrier and protect the violet fairy with his own body. In the next moment, the killing light that was infused with divine might landed on his body, instantly shattering the defensive light screen that he had put up, causing his chest to explode. Blood splattered everywhere, and even the violet fairy behind him was sent flying hundreds of feet away before she was able to stabilize herself. Blood flowed from her chest and spilled out from her mouth. Her face had also turned somewhat pale in an instant. "Brother!" The violet fairy trembled slightly. She was protected by Lin Tian behind her, so she wasn't injured. However, seeing that Lin Tian was severely injured made her feel extremely uncomfortable. "It's fine. Don't worry." Lin Tian shook his head. He activated the nirvana of the sun and quickly healed his injured body. At this moment, a soft groan was heard. In front of them, on the altar, it seemed that because the outermost boundary of the altar had been destroyed, Ziyue's life force was constantly fading away. She opened her eyes slightly, and then seemed to feel a very familiar presence. She turned her head with difficulty and saw Lin Tian and the violet fairy. "Sister." Her voice was weak, and there wasn't much light in her eyes. After saying those 2 words, it seemed that she didn't have the strength to continue speaking. The violet fairy's mouth was still bleeding. Seeing that Ziyue on the altar had woken up, she felt that Ziyue's life force was constantly fading away. She immediately moved again and rushed towards the altar at an even faster speed. At the same time, she said to Ziyue, "Ziyue, don't be afraid. We will save you. You will be fine. You will definitely be fine." Zi Huaikong snorted coldly. He raised his hand. An ray of divine light fell on the violet fairy. She was immediately swept away, and blood splattered in the air. On the altar, the light in Ziyue's eyes dimmed even more. Seeing this scene, her body trembled slightly. "Sister." She almost didn't have any strength left. After shouting that one word, it was difficult for her to continue speaking. "Save her? How can you talk about saving her? She came here voluntarily to contribute to the return of her ancestors. This is her honor, Zi Huaikong said coldly. Lin Tian used the duality steps and caught the violet fairy. He used the sun nirvana technique to help the violet fairy recover her injured body. In the blink of an eye, her injuries were stabilized. Boom! An even more powerful aura surged out from his body. His origin divine weapon appeared, intertwining with purple primordial light. It was sacred and majestic. Strands of lightning intertwined around his body. The aura was extremely shocking. "You dog!" With a whoosh, he rushed out with anger and coldness. He used the immortal Emperor Pagoda, which was comparable to a true divine weapon, to suppress Zi Huaikong. Crack! 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 The void was annihilated inch by inch. This is primordial origin chi. It's actually so dense. Could it be that this pagoda was forged from primordial heavenly crystal? For a moment, the 9 demon ancestors on the altar were all shocked. At the same time, the mid-stage true god Zi Huaikong was also moved. He had never thought that Lin Tian would actually have a treasure weapon forged from primordial heavenly crystal. The value of such a treasure weapon could be said to be immeasurable. Good. Very good. You actually have such a sacred item. His eyes shone brightly as he erupted with even more powerful divine power. He pressed down on Lin Tian. At the same time, he transformed into a giant palm imprint mixed with divine Tao and forcefully grabbed at the immortal Emperor Pagoda. It was obvious that he wanted to seize the pagoda by force. Anger intertwined in Lin Tian's eyes. He summoned the pure yang flame, the immortal Tao reincarnation diagram, the Chaos Emperor Fist, and other techniques. At the same time, he summoned the immortal King Battle Spear with the weapon control technique. All kinds of divine light and killing intent intertwined and pressed down on Zi Huaikong like a galaxy. One had to say that this power was extremely terrifying. It shook Zi Huaikong, a mid-stage true god powerhouse, until the giant palm imprint of divine light was shattered. Even his divine body swayed for a moment. However, in the next moment, the divine power he emitted became even stronger. All kinds of treasure lights appeared and pressed down on Lin Tian mercilessly again. Bang! Lin Tian's body trembled violently from the impact, and blood flowed from his mouth. However, the golden light outside his body became even stronger. The immortal Emperor Pagoda shook the sky, and all kinds of treasured techniques were unleashed as if they were going to destroy the world. He kept Zi Huaikong at his side. "Little Purple, take this opportunity to take Purple Moon away." Blood flowed from his mouth, but his eyes were extremely cold. The Violet Fairy nodded and quickly rushed toward the altar. Zi Huaikong raised his hand and waved it at the Violet Fairy with divine light, but Lin Tian blocked it in an instant. "Do you really think you can restrain me?" Zi Huaikong's voice was cold. The divine power outside his body became even stronger. It shook Lin Tian's body until it kept shaking, and blood flowed from his mouth. Chapter 1750. The power of faith was divine and holy, mixed with a surging aura, causing the surrounding space to tremble involuntarily. Combined with various divine light techniques, its might could be said to be somewhat intimidating. What kind of power is this? It gushed out from the sect pagoda made of the primordial heavenly crystal. Could it be the power contained within the primordial heavenly crystal? How could such a divine material contain such great power? The 9 demon ancestors were shocked by the power of faith, but they did not know what it was. At this time, they only thought that it was the power contained within the ultimate divine material for forging weapons like the primordial heavenly crystal, and it was summoned by Lin Tian at this time. Zi Huaikong was slightly moved when he was enveloped by this power. However, it only lasted for an instant. In the next moment, his expression became cold again, and an even more powerful divine power gushed out, shaking the surrounding space and directly crushing it. Boom! 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 Divine light surged and intertwined, and Lin Tian firmly restrained Zi Huaikong by his side. However, Zi Huaikong was too strong, and his cultivation was an entire realm higher than his. Although he forcibly restrained Zi Huaikong by his side and used all kinds of great techniques, he could not hurt Zi Huaikong at all. His body was constantly shaking, and blood kept flowing out of his mouth. However, his expression did not change from beginning to end, and it was still cold and murderous as it bombarded with terrifying power again and again. It was also at this time that Zi Huaikong finally arrived at the altar. "Ziyu!" she shouted and brought Ziyu down from the altar that was covered in divine patterns at an extremely fast speed. "Bastard!" Zi Huaikong's eyes shot out 2 rays of cold light, and his divine path surged. With a bang, he sent Lin Tian flying and took a step toward the altar. At the same time, in the sky, the divine altar suddenly emitted intense divine light. There was an extremely dense demonic radiance that blossomed. Extremely dense. "It's done?" Zi Huaikong stopped in his tracks, and a look of surprise appeared in his eyes. At this time, he forcibly changed his direction and took a step toward the altar. On the altar, the 9 fairy patriarchs were pleasantly surprised and excited. The ritual is complete. The ancestral altar is completely filled with fairy light. It's hard to believe that Ziyue's fairy essence is so powerful. It's far more powerful than we imagined. It's enough to match up to all those who sacrificed their ancestors. The other fairy ancestor looked at Zi Huaikong, who was charging over, and seemed a little excited. "Huaikong, according to what you said back then, when the divine altar is filled with the fairy radiance, it will be the day of the ancestor's return. Now, we can use the final technique to let the ancestor return and be reborn. At that time, my Fey race will..." Boom! Zi Huaikong stepped onto the godly altar. His godly aura surged, and he suddenly attacked the 9 monster ancestors, sending them flying away from the godly altar. The 9 demon ancestors were all shocked. "Huaikong, what are you doing?" Zi Huaikong had actually suddenly attacked them, causing them to be shocked. Even Lin Tian was moved by this scene. "After waiting for so many years, I finally succeeded." Zi Huaikong landed on the godly altar with an excited expression. He couldn't help but laugh wildly, completely different from his previous cold expression. The next moment, with a rumble, circles of strange divine patterns lit up on the godly altar. A very shocking barrier was formed, enveloping him and the entire godly altar. Then, within the godly altar, strands of fairy radiance continuously surged into his body. For a moment, his essence, energy, and spirit began to rise at an astonishing speed, and his cultivation also rapidly became stronger. "Huaikong, what are you doing?" The 9 fairy patriarchs were shocked and furious. At this time, Zi Huaikong was actually devouring the fairy radiance that was used to resurrect the fairy king in the godly altar. The 9 of them rushed forward together, bombarding the barrier outside the godly altar. 9 different kinds of divine power interweaved in this space. However, the barrier outside the godly altar was too strong and incomparably tough. Even when the 9 of them attacked together, they couldn't shake it in the slightest. Zi Huaikong was at the center of the godly altar, his eyes full of excitement as he laughed wildly. The fairy radiance in the godly altar continued to pour into his body, causing his cultivation to rise continuously. In the blink of an eye, he reached the peak of the true God realm. The special technique recorded in the ancient book is indeed useful. With the refined fairy origin radiance of the same race, coupled with that special Tao pattern, it can really make my cultivation improve greatly, and I don't need to do any other cultivation. The 9 fairy patriarchs were shocked again. "You lied to us? Back then, you said that you could gather the ancestral bloodline fragments in the fairy origin radiance of the later generations to resurrect the ancestor. Was that a lie? You did it for yourself." It was Zi Huaikong who told them that he could resurrect the fairy king, and this ritual had been going on for hundreds of thousands of years. Zi Huaikong sneered. "The ancestor has been dead for who knows how many years. How could he still be alive?" You fools actually believed that I could resurrect the ancestor and spared no effort to cooperate with me to complete the plan. The nine were furious. You lied to all of us. For your own sake, you caused the deaths of so many geniuses in your race, and even your own flesh and blood were involved. So what? Those descendants of the race can contribute to me, and it's their honor. As for flesh and blood, humph, on the path of cultivation, one's own strength is the truth. Flesh and blood are useless things. As for flesh and blood, their flesh and blood were given by me. It's only natural that they sacrifice themselves for me. Huaikong stood at the center of the godly altar, the fairy radiance continuously pouring into his body, and he broke through to the heavenly god realm in an instant. Look, I've now reached the heavenly god realm, and I've surpassed the strongest of all the great races in the other immortal continents. After that, my cultivation will continue to rise, and it's even possible for me to reach the divine king realm. At that time, even if the Lord Theological Seminary comes, I won't have to fear them. With me, in the future, the fairy race can also dominate the immortal domain, and your wishes can also be realized. He laughed wildly, and more fairy radiance poured into his body from the godly altar, causing his essence, energy, and cultivation to continue to rise. The nine ancestors of the fairy race were even more shocked and angry, and they all trembled with anger. Lin Tian never thought that all of this was actually a trap set up by Huaikong. Under the guise of reviving the fairy king, Huaikong collected and refined the life source of the countless fairy race geniuses of the Li dynasty, and even his own flesh and blood were part of it. All of this was for himself, so that he could refine the fairy radiance to forcibly increase his cultivation. The violet fairy's anxious voice came from the altar, and Lin Tian quickly moved his gaze away from the godly altar in the sky. He took a step towards the altar, and in the blink of an eye, he was next to the violet fairy. Wake up, wake up! The violet fairy shook Ziyu's body, and she looked very anxious, and there was even a trace of fear in her eyes. Ziyu's eyes opened slightly, and her face was extremely pale. Her lips moved as if she wanted to say something, but she couldn't make a sound. Then, in the next moment, she closed her eyes, and the life aura on her body disappeared in the blink of an eye. The violet fairy trembled. Ziyu! Wake up! She had lived for a very long time, far longer than Ziyu, but she wasn't tall. She looked like a little girl of 11 or 12 years old. She kept shaking Ziyu's body, and her eyes were full of panic. Lin Tian stood next to her, and his heart trembled. His body was stained with blood, and he naturally felt that Ziyu's life aura had completely disappeared. Her life source has already dried up. No need to shake her. She's already a corpse. On the godly altar, Huaikong coldly snorted and swept his gaze over the violet fairy. Wait until I've finished absorbing all the fairy radiance in the godly altar. Then I'll come and take your life source. As he spoke, he looked at the 9 fairy ancestors not far away. And your life sources? I'll take them all. Don't even think about escaping. It's useless. When I began to absorb the fairy radiance, there was already an extremely strong barrier outside. No one under the heavenly god realm can break it, and you will all become my nutrients. With the existence of the barrier, no one outside will know what happened here. In the future, I will become the fairy race's god, and then I will truly shake the immortal realm. The 9 fairy ancestors were even more shocked and angry. Then, they spread out their divine senses and discovered that there was indeed an extremely powerful barrier covering this space. With their strength, it was absolutely impossible for them to break it. You beast! You beast! The fairy ancestor was enraged to the extreme. At this time, on the altar, an extremely powerful and pure fairy radiance appeared. It surged out from the violet fairy's body and endlessly flowed into Ziyu's body. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. Ziyu, you'll be fine. Hurry and wake up, wake up. The violet fairy's body trembled. He knelt on the altar floor beside Ziyu, and the fairy radiance crazily rushed into Ziyu's body. The pure fairy radiance completely enveloped Ziyu. This level of brilliance was so shocking that the enraged 9 demon patriarchs couldn't help but look askance at the same time, all of them greatly astonished. It's actually, this fairy radiance was too strong and too pure. Although they had vaguely felt that the fairy radiance of the fairy radiance was very pure, they never thought that it would be so exaggerated. This fairy radiance was at least hundreds of times stronger than Ziyu's fairy radiance. It must be known that this kind of aura had nothing to do with cultivation. It was only related to the original strength of the fairy radiance. In the history of their race, only the fairy empress could compare to such a powerful fairy radiance. In other words, as long as this fairy radiance continued to grow normally, it could reach the same height as the fairy empress, or even surpass her. And the fairy empress was a god emperor in the past. Even Zi Huaikong, who had reached the height of a heavenly god with the help of the endless fairy radiance, was shocked. He never thought that the violet fairy, who had been unable to awaken her fairy bloodline for a long time, would have such a powerful fairy radiance in her body. Immediately, in the next moment, he couldn't help but show surprise and excitement. Good. Very good. When I've finished absorbing the fairy radiance in the altar, your fairy radiance will be mine. He stared at the violet fairy from the altar. His eyes were full of divine light, and he couldn't help but laugh wildly. Yueshi, you really gave birth to a good daughter for me. Chapter 1751. The powerful Fey light was vast and mighty. It was too intense, shocking everyone present. Even Lin Tian, who didn't know much about the source of the Fey, couldn't help but be moved. He could feel that this Fey light was mixed with a vast source energy, like a boundless galaxy. Purple Moon, wake up! Wake up! This big sister will never be angry at you again. Don't die! Wake up! The violet fairy's face paled. The Fey source light surged out endlessly, crazily rushing into Purple Moon's body. However, this was useless. Purple Moon's life source had dried up, and it was difficult to reignite the fires of her life. No, don't! The violet fairy's body trembled, and her eyes were filled with panic and fear. An even stronger fairy origin light bloomed. It was as if a fairy spirit gate that had been sealed in her body for a very long time had been opened. The fairy origin light that she emitted instantly became several times stronger, and it poured into Purple Moon's body even more crazily. However, it was still useless. Purple Moon's life aura no longer reappeared, and her body even began to turn cold. Ah! The powerful Fey source light became wild, and then it was extinguished. The violet fairy cried, her tears falling like a flood. She loathed the bloodline in her body, loathed the Fey race. But after so many years, when a sister with the same bloodline appeared in front of her, serving her tea, giving her water, carefully circling her like a little maid, always smiling, always calling her big sister, fawning over her in all sorts of ways, all for the sake of making her admit that she was her sister. All for the sake of seeing this big sister she had never met before. How could she not be moved? No matter how much she loathed the bloodline in her body, no matter how much she loathed the Fey race, there was still the shadow of this lovable little sister in her heart. But now, her only sister was lying in front of her, motionless. Her life aura had completely disappeared, and her body began to turn cold. Like this, she had passed away. She didn't even smile at her sister when she was still alive. Ah! Tears kept falling, wetting her cheeks. She clutched Ziyue's clothes, her body trembling. Lin Tian stood to the side, watching the violet fairy cry like a child. His immortal king body couldn't help but tremble. He shuddered violently, and an explosion sounded in his head. The fairy-like girl who had always called him Lord Big Brother when he was still weak, the girl who had killed several emperors for him when he was in danger, the girl who had affectionately hugged his neck from behind and said, "You have to protect me in the future," when he had become strong, was now crying in front of him like a child. He still remembered that he had promised her that he would definitely save Ziyu. But now, Ziyu was dead. He couldn't fulfill his promise to her. He couldn't protect the little sister she cared about. For a moment, his mind was buzzing. All he could see was the Violet Fairy's sad, crying face. All he could hear was the Violet Fairy's cries. The whole world seemed to be spinning. Extreme anger instantly filled his entire body, and thoughts of destruction surged like a vast ocean. Boom! An extremely terrifying aura suddenly gushed out from his body. The entire Fey race began to sway. Faintly, a horrifying sound came from his body, as if millions upon millions of gods and demons were roaring. His head thundered, and his anger burned like flames. His thoughts of destruction became even stronger. His black hair danced in the wind, and in his right eye, endless strange runes gradually appeared. 9 black moon-like marks appeared in his right eye, and they were connected by strange lines, interweaving with each other. This is he. As this terrifying aura gushed out from Lin Tian's body, the 9 Fey ancestors couldn't help but tremble as they saw Lin Tian's right eye. They couldn't help but stumble backwards. Even Zi Huaikong, who was on the altar and had already reached the heavenly divinity realm, was shocked. He was stunned by the aura Lin Tian suddenly emitted and by Lin Tian's right eye. Even the crying Violet Fairy could feel the terrifying aura that Lin Tian suddenly emitted. Then, she saw Lin Tian's strange appearance and that strange right eye. With a sobbing voice, she said, "Brother, boom!" Lin Tian's black hair danced in the wind. Anger and destruction filled his entire body. The aura he emitted became even more terrifying, as if he had turned into a demon. He raised his head and stared at Zi Huaikong, who was absorbing the Fey's radiance from the altar. Kill! 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 He seemed to have lost his self-awareness, as if he had gone mad. It was as if he had turned into a wild beast. In an instant, he disappeared from where he stood, and in the next moment, he appeared outside the altar in the sky. He directly punched the enchantment outside the altar. Ka! With a crisp sound, the powerful enchantment outside the altar instantly shattered. He charged into the altar like a mad beast, and in an instant, he was in front of Zi Huaikong. A second punch came down. Zi Huaikong hurriedly punched out with his heavenly divinity realm divine power. The 2 fists collided in the blink of an eye. Poof! Blood splattered everywhere. Zi Huaikong's fist was shattered, and his entire body was blasted out of the altar. What happened? Why did he suddenly? In the distance, the 9 Fey ancestors trembled together. They were all shocked. Previously, when facing the mid-stage true god Zi Huaikong, Lin Tian was constantly injured. He was no match for him at all. But now, Zi Huaikong had reached the heavenly divinity realm after absorbing the endless Fey's radiance. He propped up an extremely sturdy enchantment around the altar, but Lin Tian's punch had shattered the powerful enchantment. Then he sent Zi Huaikong, who had already reached the heavenly divinity realm, flying with a punch. Could it be that he was hiding his strength before? No, it doesn't seem like it. Even now, his cultivation is still at the Immortal King realm. He definitely wasn't hiding his strength. But how could he? The 9 Fey ancestors were shocked. In the sky, Zi Huaikong was injured and blasted out of the altar. He was also shocked and angry at the same time. Who the hell are you? Divine light surged around his body, and the arm that Lin Tian had shattered instantly healed. Then, he directly strode back towards the altar. He wanted to kill Lin Tian on the altar, and then continue to absorb the Fey's radiance from the altar to strengthen himself. Lin Tian's head of black hair fluttered even more crazily and wantonly. Raising his head to look at Zi Huaikong, who was charging towards him, light flickered in his right eye. The 9 black moons that were connected together in a circular shape began to revolve. Blood flowed down from his right eye along his cheek. Buzz! The world began to tremble. The void around Zi Huaikong trembled. A strange power began to intertwine, and a pure white vortex appeared. It didn't have any terrifying aura, and one could only feel its boundless vastness, as if it could swallow the heavens and the earth. The 9 Fey ancestors trembled as if they had seen the most unbelievable thing in the world. That is... Chapter 1752. The pure white vortex intertwined in the sky, and it was somewhat transparent. The 9 true God realm Fae patriarchs couldn't help but tremble. That's destiny? It's that kind of aura, but that I have is actually summoned the Chi Providence. How is this possible? How can he do such a thing? The 9 of them trembled. In this world, destiny really did exist. Those with bad destiny could be struck by lightning in yin-yang heaven, and those with good destiny could casually walk around and pick up super treasures. However, something like fortune was the most illusory of all. It couldn't be seen, nor could it be touched. But now, a transparent, pure white vortex had appeared in front of them, clearly intertwined with the fluctuations of fortune. This caused the 9 true divinity fairy forefathers to tremble in fear and astonishment. Even the violet fairy couldn't help but be stunned by this scene. Destiny. Lin Tian's right, I had summoned the power of destiny. Kill. Lin Tian roared like a wild beast. Blood flowed down his cheek from his right eye. The destiny vortex appeared horizontally, pressing down on Zi Huaikong. Zi Huaikong immediately trembled. With his current cultivation, he could naturally feel the power of destiny. He was immediately horrified and quickly moved to the side. However, the power of the destiny vortex was too terrifying. It was as if the surroundings had fallen into a swamp, swallowing everything. Puff! Blood sputtered. In just an instant, half of his heavenly god body was crushed by the destiny vortex. Damn it! He was shocked and angry. With a roar, he summoned a seal. The seal was covered with strange runes, and it immediately emitted an extremely terrifying aura. It was a peak true god weapon. As the seal appeared, all kinds of runes and seals surged out from it. They intertwined with a majestic power, forcing the last half of his body out of the range of the destiny vortex. Half of his body was bleeding. He gasped for breath and struggled to reform his body. He looked at Lin Tian in shock and anger. Yu, an immortal king, was actually able to summon the legendary karmic luck, transforming that illusory energy into something corporeal. This caused his heart to tremble. Earlier, he was almost devoured by that vortex of karmic luck. Lin Tian stood on the altar, his black hair fluttering in the wind. His face was filled with murderous intent, almost to the point of insanity. 9 black full moons gradually appeared in the pupil of his left eye, just like the 9 black full moons in his right eye. They were also connected in a circular shape by a peculiar Tao pattern. In an instant, the aura emanating from his body became even more terrifying. In this place, the entire sky trembled. Facing Lin Tian's gaze and aura at this moment, Zi Huaikong couldn't help but tremble fiercely and stagger backwards. He felt as if his throat was being choked by an invisible hand. Yu, his voice trembled as a sense of horror rose up in his heart. Lin Tian stood on the altar. His black hair fluttered in the wind, and his eyes were filled with madness. He disappeared from where he stood in an instant and appeared in front of Zi Huaikong in the next moment. Roaring like a wild beast, he moved both of his arms and swept out a sky full of fish shadows. Bang! 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 Blood splattered everywhere. At this moment, the speed of his punches was too fast. Zi Huaikong couldn't react in time and was directly bombarded like a sandbag. His heavenly god-tier body became tattered in the blink of an eye. Damn it! Zi Huaikong roared in shock and anger. He freed one of his hands and intertwined his heavenly god-tier divine Tao as he threw a punch at Lin Tian. Lin Tian raised his hand and grabbed Zi Huaikong's fist. He pulled fiercely and directly tore off Zi Huaikong's entire arm. Then, with a poof, it shattered in his hand. Drops of blood fell on his face and body. He seemed to have lost himself at this moment, but his heart was filled with endless murderous intent towards the person in front of him. He launched a primitive and cruel attack like a wild beast. After tearing off Zi Huaikong's arm, he grabbed half of his head and tore his body apart. He grabbed all of his internal organs and shattered them one by one. Blood splattered like rain. In the distance, the 9 demon ancestors watched this scene, and all of them trembled. They were all true god-tier powerhouses, and it was very common for their bodies to be shattered in battle. It was not a big deal at all. However, at this moment, seeing Lin Tian tear apart Zi Huaikong's body like a wild beast, they couldn't help but feel a chill run down their spines and their hearts tremble. Zi Huaikong let out a miserable shriek as he quickly reformed his body amidst the blood that filled the sky. He was extremely shocked and furious as he directly pressed down on Lin Tian with his peak true body grade seal. Die for me! The peak true god tier weapon was extremely powerful. As it pressed down, it immediately shattered the void in all directions. Lin Tian raised his hand, and a black full moon spun in his eyes. Blood flowed out from his eyes uncontrollably. Boom! A pure white and transparent river intertwined with his gaze and flowed out. There was even the faint sound of flowing water as it pressed down on the peak true god tier weapon. With a whoosh, the peak true god tier weapon was shattered on the spot. Zi Huaikong couldn't help but tremble. This was his peak true god tier weapon that was activated with his current heavenly god tier cultivation base. However, it was crushed by Lin Tian so easily. You? What are you? He trembled. Lin Tian could actually mobilize the most illusory power of destiny in the world to battle. Lin Tian roared angrily. His black hair danced wildly as he looked at Zi Huaikong with bloodshot eyes. Buzz! There, the void trembled and another long river of destiny condensed. It was much stronger than the previous vortex of destiny. It was mixed with a vast and awe-inspiring aura as it directly crushed over. Zi Huaikong trembled in fear and roared. He used all his divine powers and divine techniques to meet the long river of destiny that was pressing down on him. However, it was crushed into pieces in an instant. Then, the long river of karmic luck crushed down, and with a pu sound, it blasted him into a bloody mist. Only his soul wasn't destroyed, and it escaped with great difficulty and condensed a body once more. Lin Tian's eyes were bleeding, and his cheeks were partially dyed red. He stared at Zi Huaikong, and like a peerless demon, he strode towards Zi Huaikong step by step. With every step he took, the space trembled, and strands of the light of providence revolved around him. Zi Huaikong trembled violently as he walked towards Lin Tian. Looking at the light of destiny outside Lin Tian's body, he couldn't help but retreat. Fear appeared in his eyes and face. Don't come over. The power of destiny was too strong. It was simply unstoppable. At this moment, he felt a clear threat of death. Lin Tian stepped forward as if he didn't hear Zi Huaikong's voice at all. His face was filled with murderous intent and ferocity. Everywhere he passed, the void collapsed. Zi Huaikong trembled again. Then he gritted his teeth and turned into a ray of light. He rushed out of the forbidden land of the Fei clan at an extremely fast speed. Chapter 1753. Zi Huaikong was terrified. The aura Lin Tian emitted at this moment was truly too powerful and too terrifying. The surging power of destiny circled around him, and that kind of power could simply ignore the difference in cultivation level. His heavenly god cultivation level was practically as fragile as bean dregs and weeds when facing the power displayed by the immortal king level Lin Tian. Swoosh! At this moment, his speed was shockingly fast, and it brought with it waves of sonic booms, causing the nearby space to be directly shattered into pieces. Now, facing the suddenly changed Lin Tian, an indescribable fear arose in his heart. He didn't even care about the fairy's quintessence radiance remaining in the divine altar, nor did he care about seizing Lin Tian's primordial pagoda. He only wanted to leave this place as soon as possible to save his life. The aura around Lin Tian's body was terrifying, and black moons revolved around his eyes. He was like a peerless demon lord as he stared at the direction Zi Huaikong had fled in. He directly took a step forward, and his speed was many times faster than Zi Huaikong's. It was as if he had truly teleported, and in the blink of an eye, he blocked Zi Huaikong's path. Zi Huaikong trembled. You boom! The might of his fist shook the surroundings. Lin Tian punched out with eyes filled with murderous intent, and the power of his fist was mixed with the power of destiny he emitted at this moment. It was shocking, and it directly pierced through Zi Huaikong's chest. He roared as he grabbed Zi Huaikong's body, and with both hands, he forcefully tore Zi Huaikong's body into pieces. Blood splattered all over his body, and it dyed his black hair red. It was a ghastly sight, and he looked like a vengeful ghost that had walked out of purgatory. Zi Huaikong's soul wasn't destroyed, and he once again reformed his heavenly god body. However, his face had already become extremely pale, and it was obvious that he had suffered a great injury. Lin Tian's gaze fell on Zi Huaikong, and he walked over step by step. In his eyes, the 18 black moons seemed extremely terrifying, strange, mysterious, and terrifying. Zi Huaikong couldn't help but retreat. He wanted to flee again, but he discovered that the surrounding space had been directly sealed by the tangible power of destiny. With his current strength, it was impossible for him to break through. "No, don't come over." When he saw Lin Tian walking towards him, he could feel the murderous intent and brutality radiating from Lin Tian's body. He couldn't help but take a few steps back. The fear in his eyes grew even stronger. He pointed at the violet fairy on the altar and shouted, "You know that I am her father, her biological father. We are related by blood. You're friends with her, right? They are very good friends, right? So, you can't kill me. Don't kill me." Lin Tian took a step forward. At this time, his body was completely filled with anger and killing intent. It was as if he was completely possessed. It was as if he couldn't hear anything from the outside world. There was only killing intent in his eyes. He stared at Zi Huaikong, and blood flowed out of his eyes again. The entire space in this place shook violently, and another river of fate appeared, pressing down on Zi Huaikong in a mighty manner. Buzz! The space shook. The river of fate didn't have a terrifying aura of destruction, and it was only vast and mixed within. It was as if the real sky was pressing down, and at the same time, it completely froze the space in all directions. Zi Huaikong trembled. He wanted to flee, but at this moment, because the power of destiny had sealed the surroundings, he seemed to have fallen into a swamp, and his body couldn't move at all. In the next moment, the vast river of fate pressed down. It was capable of destroying everything, and it directly shattered half of his body and swallowed the other half of his body. Zi Huaikong let out a miserable cry. This time, the river of fate was even more terrifying than before. When it shattered half of his body, it destroyed half of his soul as well. "Stop! Don't kill me! Stop! Ah!" A horrified scream echoed, and in the next moment, it became silent. The river of fate crushed through, shattering the last half of Zi Huaikong's body. His soul, body, and soul were all destroyed, and he completely disappeared from the world. In the distance, the 9 ancestors of the Fei clan trembled together. Zi Huaikong, who had absorbed the light of endless Fei source to reach the heavenly god realm, was so easily obliterated by Lin Tian. Lin Tian had actually summoned the power of destiny. How can he do such a thing? The 9 of them looked at Lin Tian, and their backs turned cold. Ah! A roar shook the sky, and the sky trembled. Lin Tian's aura became even more terrifying. His body was stained with blood, and he stared at the 9 elders of the Fei clan like a murderous demon. His face was ferocious, and he closed in on the 9 of them. Facing Lin Tian's actions, the 9 Fei clan old ancestors all trembled. With Lin Tian in this state, how could they possibly block him? They couldn't even communicate with him. This was because they could clearly see that Lin Tian didn't have much of a sense of self right now. Beneath the heavens, on the altar, the violet fairy looked at Lin Tian's current state. Naturally, she could see that Lin Tian had fallen into a demonic state. She was both worried and uncomfortable. Tears streamed down her face, and she cried out towards the heavens, "Big brother!" Lin Tian stepped into the heavens, his face filled with malevolence. He closed in on the 9 Fei clan old ancestors, his eyes filled with killing intent. After hearing this voice, he couldn't help but stop. He looked in the direction of the voice, and his eyes fell on the violet fairy. His entire body was stained with blood. His cheeks and hair were dyed red with blood. His strange eyes reflected the violet fairy's tears. After 3 breaths of time, his body trembled. His eyes that were filled with killing intent and malevolence gradually began to shine with a clear light. Little Violet, as he shouted out these 2 words, the clear light in his eyes became even thicker. Cough! He coughed up blood, and his vision blurred. With some difficulty, he looked at the violet fairy on the altar. Then, he saw Violet Moon lying beside her. As he looked at Ziyu, who was lying motionless on the ground, he trembled again. Then, he tilted his head and looked at the divine altar in another part of the sky. His pupils trembled, and as blood flowed down, the divine altar exploded. The endless light of the fairy's origin that was left inside was wrapped in pure white power of destiny, and it went straight to his side. He grabbed this power and instantly appeared beside the violet fairy. Together with the power of destiny that wrapped around the Fey Source Light, he poured it into Violet Moon's body. This Fey Source Light was the source essence of countless Fey geniuses throughout the years. And, most importantly, there was a massive amount of source light that originally belonged to Violet Moon. At this time, when Violet Moon's life source had just dried up, his eyes could see that with this vast amount of Fey Source Light that contained Violet Moon's own source strength, there was a great chance that it could reignite Violet Moon's Fey Source. The endless Fey Source Light, wrapped in the power of destiny, poured into Violet Moon's body. The dense light shrouded Violet Moon, and after a dozen breaths of time, the light gradually dissipated. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.